Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural opening symposium of the Smart Nation Innovations Week. The SNI Week is a week-long series of events for the international and local tech and innovation community to gather in Singapore to share and learn about digital transformation across nations and cities and to explore the future impact of technology. Now, this year's SNI Week is held in partnership with the Infocom Media Development Authority, the Ministry of Communications and Information, NUS Enterprise Unbound, and the Smart Nation and Digital Government Group, which comprises the Smart Nation and Digital Government Office and the Government Technology Agency of Singapore. Now, today's opening symposium will see an exciting lineup of speakers and panelists. Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Teo Chee Hean, will deliver his opening address, sharing more on the upcoming Singapore's Smart Nation initiatives. Mr. Caesar Sengupta, the Vice President of Next Billion Users at Google, will then deliver his keynote speech. And thereafter, we will deep dive into the topics of transforming nations and cities and economic transformation, and that will be held in two panel discussions. So without any further delay, I would now welcome Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Teo Chee Hean, to deliver the opening address.
Good morning, everyone. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to join you at the inaugural Smart Nation Innovations Week Opening Symposium. To our overseas guests, a very warm welcome to Singapore. Singapore has worked with like-minded regional and international partners over many decades to build an open and inclusive global environment for the exchange of ideas, the flow of trade and investments, and the deepening of people-to-people ties. Even as we continue to enhance these physical interconnections in the traditional air, land, and sea domains, the digital domain now offers many new ways to interact, collaborate, and form new partnerships, with exciting opportunities to grow our future economy and improve the lives of all our citizens. Today, Singapore, by some accounts, is one of the most networked economies in the world. We have invested in fiber broadband connectivity so that high-speed broadband mobile internet connectivity is available and affordable to companies and individuals all across our nation. No doubt, a relatively small one. This physical infrastructure and connectivity provides the foundation, but new, important back-end, whole-of-nation enabling systems are needed to allow us to fully exploit these new technologies to create game-changing, exciting new businesses and jobs, and to allow our citizens to enjoy access to public and private sector services in new ways that make a real difference to their lives. So what does Smart Nation mean to us as citizens and businesses and for our international partnerships? Our Smart Nation journey has to improve daily life in our city and make it more convenient and secure, create exciting jobs and opportunities for everyone, and energize those who are able, creative, and driven to pursue their dreams, not only in Singapore, but with friends all around the world. A smart nation has meaning when our citizens are more empowered, when we're able to take more control of and see real improvements in our daily life experiences. Better work-life balance, what time we work, whether we're tied to an office or a chair or a desk. Better use of our time, staying more aware and connected with our friends. Smoother and faster commutes when we need to commute. Taking charge of our healthcare and financial needs. Smart Nation will be powered by technology, the enabling game changer. But technology is not an end in itself. To achieve widespread use and benefits, the applications need to be seamless and intuitive to use, without the user needing to spend time to navigate the complex underlying technology. So let me illustrate with a few examples. Many of us already use wearables or our mobile apps to remind us to exercise. In Singapore, it's become a fad to track whether we have walked our 10,000 steps today, every day. So that's the subject of conversation at dinners very often. How many steps did you walk today? And they all take out their devices and compare with each other. We want to help more citizens stay fit and healthy. Citizens can manage their own diet and exercise and decide what is more suited to their individual needs and contexts. For example, we can help our young working adults, including our national servicemen, maintain their fitness. Or we can monitor our vital signs and manage our medications with a personalized digital health coach and be alerted to call in for a telemedicine consultation. This means that healthcare is not delivered only at the hospital or the doctor's clinic. We can redesign our healthcare system by working with our citizens to keep us all as fit and healthy as possible while making best use of our healthcare resources. I want to emphasize that last step because we can have all these individual devices for individuals to use, but I think when you put it all together and redesign the entire healthcare system, that's where the real opportunity comes for system-level efficiency and system-level delivery of high-quality services to our citizens. In our public housing estates, where more than 80% of Singaporeans live, the use of the Internet of Things and analytics for preventive maintenance and municipal operations can help make the environment more livable and sustainable. Sensors can help our households and new estates save on utilities, and operators can do more targeted and timely maintenance to improve lift reliability or public cleanliness. And there are many, many more applications that can be delivered or can be received by citizens, so they can pull down once we have a network and a base going. Today, we already use data and data analytics together with a network of sensors and roadside cameras to keep residents safe and ensure that traffic is smooth. In future, with more data, for example, from smart street lamps, which we are implementing, and tools to better plan bus routes and improve carpooling and bike sharing, commuters can plan their journeys, save time, and have a better, safer experience getting around our city for work or leisure. The Digital Readiness Blueprint, which was launched by my colleague, the Minister for Communications and Information, S. Iswaran, last weekend, also outlined our plans to help all Singaporeans gain digital skills and use digital tools in their daily lives. Our government services are also going through a major transformation to put our citizens at the center. The objective is to make services intuitive and easy for all to use, in several languages, and even if we are less familiar with technology. At significant moments of life, that's what we've called the program, Moments of Life. For example, when welcoming a newborn to the family, parents will be able to select from a suite of public services from different agencies, including registering baby's birth, automatically enrolling baby onto relevant support schemes such as our baby bonus, which babies get in Singapore, or parents get in Singapore. Parents will also be able to find information about preschools, what they offer around their residence, and be able to get all the services and information they need delivered to them when they have a new baby, rather than to have to go agency by agency or private sector operator by private sector operator. We are releasing a blueprint for digital government today, outlining how the government will reorganize and transform ourselves to deliver public services better through the use of technology. This involves improving the user experience interface, where citizens interact with a greater range of government e-services, but also important back-end, whole-of-nation enabling systems, such as SingPass Mobile, which will be rolled out as part of our national digital identity system, which is being implemented later this year. This is a two-factor PKI-based system which will enable our citizens to easily and securely transact with each other and access our government services without the need for physical tokens or SMS passwords. We can pay our bills, sign documents online, apply for public housing, buy or sell a house or a car. A smart nation has meaning when our businesses can exploit new opportunities in the digital economy. This includes operating more efficiently, reaching out to new markets, to digital platforms, and creating new businesses in sectors which were not available in the pre-digital economy. There will be many exciting new jobs in the digital economy, in emerging technology like artificial intelligence or data science, but also from making creative and innovative use of commonly available digital tools or platforms to expand businesses in new ways to create new businesses. There are now a whole range of programs to help everyone be digitally ready and digitally skilled, from introductory programs for the community to make best use of digital services, to those for the tech experts at the sharp end of the new enabling technologies in our universities and research institutes. To facilitate new opportunities and business models in the digital economy, the Monetary Authority of Singapore is working with industry partners to enhance our national e-payments ecosystem. Our focus is on building common links at the back end, while supporting a range of e-payment platforms at the user interface. What we want to do is to get the back end right so that we can support flexible interfaces at the front end for the convenience of our citizens. This will enable consumers and businesses to enjoy more convenience, flexibility, and efficiency at the point of sale or transaction, whether it's physical or virtual. Simplicity of use at the front end and integration at the back end will help to make the overall e-payment ecosystem flexible, open, and contestable, allowing new technology and new payment platforms to come into the market to serve consumers and businesses better. This may well be a subject of some interest for discussion later. While we were having a little bit of coffee just now before coming in here, there was already a very heated and energetic debate going on. And I hope that that will include the rest of you and you can get your word in as well. To help our businesses take full advantage of the digital economy, the Infocom Media Development Authority is working with our businesses, industry associations, and unions to accelerate digitalization and build digital capabilities across our industries. The services and digital economy is also a focus area in our $14 billion US Research, Innovation, and Enterprise 2020 Master Plan. We aim to spark digital innovation to support advanced manufacturing and engineering, health and biomedical services, and urban solutions and sustainability. For instance, we have some strengths in artificial intelligence, which are being applied in aircraft engine design and maintenance forecasting. One of the major engine manufacturers in the world has a corporate lab with Nanyang Technological University and is doing some very interesting work. Our medical researchers and data scientists are working together using the resources at our National Supercomputer Center to develop precision medicine for our citizens in our future healthcare system. The digital domain cuts across national boundaries. A smart nation also means that we collaborate with our international partners and other smart cities to deliver digital solutions that link and benefit people and businesses across boundaries. Our national level projects, such as the National Digital Identity and the e-payments infrastructure, not only enable more secure and convenient digital services in Singapore, but also allow businesses to develop innovative new services and business models that can apply across borders and economies. The National Digital Identity provides definitive proof of identity, not just physically face-to-face, but virtually all over the internet. Our e-payments infrastructure allows a trusted exchange of value to take place virtually, allowing parties who may otherwise be unknown to each other to transact reliably and in a trusted way. The infrastructure enables the secure, trusted exchange of information and value that underpins digital commerce and digital transactions. For instance, businesses can access trade finance instruments digitally to reduce time to market and save on transaction fees. We have recently adopted the Pan-European Public Procurement Online e-invoicing standard to facilitate the exchange of machine-readable e-invoices. We are also working with our partners on a blockchain-based trade financing project with Hong Kong to enable trade-related digital transactions across borders. This will provide traders, banks, and clearing facilities a common view to enable trusted transactions and execute contracts faster. At the same time, as economies become more integrated and connected digitally, we are also keenly aware of the rapid way in which cyber threats evolve and grow. Our systems that underpin global commerce and finance are constantly being probed. The more interconnected we are, and the more we rely on such interconnected digital systems, the more vulnerable we are to not just a local disruption, but potentially a system-wide global one. For instance, the WannaCry ransomware attacks impacted more than 150 countries, affecting public healthcare systems and also key shipping lines, with knock-on effects on nodes which were themselves not attacked. It was quite interesting to see the effect of WannaCry. It was not very dissimilar from the very dramatic volcanic eruption that took place in Iceland several years ago. That disrupted air traffic in Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, but also impacted traffic all over the world. And one of the international airlines, not a Singaporean airline, but an international airline which operates its call center in Singapore, the call center in Singapore is helping to reroute passengers who were affected by the Icelandic volcano who were traveling in North America and Western Europe. So the WannaCry ransomware thing, when it affected some major shipping lines, which had global operations, they operated out of Singapore in a major way. And because they were unable to access their normal digital tools, they fell back on us who were not affected to help them overcome some of the problems that they were facing in terms of scheduling their ships and their containers. So it's quite interesting how this impact spread around the world. Even though the infection itself had not reached our systems, the impact did. So the knock-on effects on nodes which were themselves not attacked can be quite considerable. Our public agencies and companies in Singapore have been implementing cybersecurity defenses that cover 11 critical information infrastructure sectors, from aviation and energy to healthcare and water supply. We conduct cybersecurity exercises every year to test the resilience of our systems as well as our collective operational responses. Last year, for the first time, we conducted a national level exercise covering all the 11 critical information infrastructure sectors. We will continue to explore joint exercises with our international partners. For example, with global financial hubs to share experiences and raise our systemic capabilities to deal with cyber incidents and emergencies that have effects across borders. Now, while I say that we've conducted all these exercises on an annual basis, I'm really not satisfied with where we are. There's a long way to go. Under our ASEAN chairmanship this year, I'm glad that 26 ASEAN cities have come together to form a smart cities network to exchange experiences in using technology and digital solutions. This enables ASEAN cities to strengthen their interconnectivity and our industry partners to deploy and scale up solutions to improve the lives of our people across the ASEAN countries. I thank the ministers in charge of ICT in ASEAN and our dialogue partners, digital government and smart city leaders, for your strong support for the network and strengthening community building in ASEAN. And I'd like to recognize their presence here in the audience today. Our Ministry of Communications and Information, together with our Smart Nation and Digital Government Office, will continue to seek out international partnerships to share experiences and explore collaborations. Ladies and gentlemen, a smart nation is about enabling our people and businesses to exploit the full potential of the new digital technologies, to improve the lives of our people and provide more opportunities for our businesses. This Smart Nation Innovations Week has brought together a strong community, including ICT ministers, government chief technology officers, smart city leaders, startups, investors, and academics from Singapore and beyond, to discuss how we can ride this digital wave together to benefit our citizens and businesses. I trust that you will make full use of the opportunity to have productive exchanges over the coming days to strengthen connections, generate new ideas, and create robust partnerships. And I wish all of you a smart and innovative week ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for sharing how the new digital government blueprint will be a great step forward for Singapore's Smart Nation initiative. Now, at this point, I would like to introduce a special group of artists who will be recording this morning's sessions live by doodling key discussion points. And I invite you to check out their work at the end of the symposium before you leave. And as you can see, they are on my right, and that's where the artists will be doodling key points from today's discussions. Now, remember, you can also engage in conversations with us. Remember, the Twitter hashtag is SmartNation. You can also follow us at Facebook as well as on Twitter. And it seems right now we're already seeing some great comments on Twitter, so keep those comments coming. Now, continue to also share your thoughts and discussions. And once again, that hashtag is SmartNation. Now, this is a reminder that you can also ask questions through Pigeonhole during the panel discussions. You may wish to take note of the details. The password for Pigeonhole is SNI Week OS, and that is SNIWEEKOS. Now, next up, our keynote speaker. He is the man leading the charge behind many of the Google products that we use today. Caesar Sengupta is Google Vice President for Product Management. Now, he leads the Next Billion Users initiative at Google, developing product strategy for high user growth countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, and Nigeria. Now, his team is not just building a set of new products for these countries, but also working with other teams at Google to improve existing products to bring more users into the digital realm. Caesar is also General Manager of Payments, running both product and engineering teams for Google's payments solutions, such as Google Pay and Tez. Now, previously, Caesar helped start and lead the Chrome OS team that launched Chromebooks. And he is clearly someone who understands how to address user needs with technology and very well placed to talk about the transformative power of technology. So please welcome Mr. Caesar Sengupta to deliver his keynote address.
Good morning, GPMTO, esteemed ministers, and distinguished guests. I'm excited to be here this week, speaking at the Smart Nation Innovation Week, and honored to be your keynote speaker. There's something just inherently uplifting about the concept of a smart nation. PM Lee recently made the point that it's no good really having a smart nation if not all citizens can benefit from it. So a smart nation is a really powerful construct in that it consciously sets out to transform the lives of all citizens for the better. And that ties into what I want to talk about today, which is the transformative power of technology. Its ability to change lives, industries, and yes, even nations. But first, let's start with the question, what is technology? You know, Douglas Adams, the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, wrote that anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. He's really getting at the heart of what we tend to think of as technology. We think of technology as the new stuff, don't we? Like things like self-driving cars or voice assistants. But technology isn't just the new stuff. It's what we humans create to help ourselves. It's things like language. It's things like clothes. It's things like shelter. It's the things that are so bound up in what it means to be human that we have stopped thinking of it as technology and just think of it as the way things are. And technology has been around from the very start. And throughout human existence, technology has helped us transform our lives, our enterprises, and our future. Now, I see some of you in the first row are thinking, this is Google. Obviously, he wants to tell us tech is good. No surprises there. I confess, I really do want to tell you that technology is good and not benign or neutral or depending on how it's used. It is good. And no surprises there. And I'll illustrate my point with 4 stories today about how technology can uplift an individual, a business, an industry, and yes, even the future. And now most of these stories have something to do with Google. And I'm not suggesting that Google is the only player that is using technology to help transform things. Many others are using technology in fantastic ways. But we're able to speak more authoritatively about our own examples, and hence the Google lens. So do forgive me the Google bias in the talk. So let's start with the first story of how technology can transform individuals' lives. And instead of me telling it, why don't we hear it straight from the person concerned? Let's meet Srinath.
मेरा नाम श्रीनाथ है। मैं केरला में इडुक्की जिला में रहने वाला बंदा हूँ। मैंने घर से 140 किलोमीटर आगे दूर पे अपना कोचिंग रेलवे स्टेशन में काम करने वाला कूली हूँ।
तो मैंने अपना बारे में सोचा तो जो शहर का जो लोग जी रहे जैसे हम भी जीना है, इसी कारण से मैंने पढ़ाई के बारे में सोचा। तो पढ़ाई बाहर करके आके अपना काम करने में बहुत दिक्कत पड़ता था, इसी वजह से मैंने बाहर का पढ़ाई छोड़ दिया। मैंने भी दिल के अंदर सोचा मेरा पढ़ाई तो गया, अभी वापस पढ़ नहीं पाएगा। अपना रेलवे स्टेशन में वाईफाई लगा हुआ था, रेल वाईफाई से मैं अपना केरला पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन का जो क्वेश्चन पेपर वगैरह निकल के पढ़ना शुरू किया। जो फ्री टाइम मिलता है उस टाइम डाउनलोड कर लेते हैं, काम का टाइम पे अपना कान में लगा करके काम करता था। केरला पीएससी का एग्जामिनेशन आ गया, विलेज असिस्टेंट का लिखा तो मेरे को 82% मार्क मिल गया, क्योंकि क्या मेरे को भी तो नौकरी पक्का मिल जाएगा। घर जाए तो मेरे घर वालों को पता है जो अपना रेल वाईफाई अपनी ज़िंदगी के साथ बहुत अच्छा दिया है, इसी में बहुत खुशी हूँ।
Isn't that just an amazing story? Sometimes the things that we take for granted can seem so unattainable to others. Sometimes something as basic as an internet connection, which many of us in Singapore have 2 fiber lines into our house of, something that everyone should have a right to, can make such a world of difference. So the first transformative power of technology is the access to economic opportunity. A chance at an education, a chance at a better job, and a chance at a better life. And more people will now have the chance because the internet is becoming cheaper and easier to access for everyone. We try our best to reinforce this through initiatives like our public Wi-Fi program, Google Station. Google Station today covers 400 railway stations in India and is used by over 8 million people every month. And we've now expanded it beyond railway stations into cities and into entire states in India. And we've now started bringing it to other countries too. So Google Station is now available in Indonesia and Mexico, and soon we'll be bringing it to many other countries. But that's just one small Wi-Fi program. Across the world, the biggest and the fastest human migration ever known is happening today. That's a migration from offline to online. In the year 2000, about 360 million people were connected, and all of them had to be anchored to their desktops to get online. Last year, 3.6 billion people, 3.6 billion, almost half the world's population had internet access. And there'll be 5 billion internet users in the next few years. 5 billion, 360 million to 5 billion in a few years. And global connectivity translates to global transformation. Think about it, a camel herder in the Gobi Desert today has better mobile communications than any of us did 30 years back. And if they have an internet connection, they have access to more information than any head of state did 20 years back. Just imagine 5 billion people with the world's information at their fingertips. 5 billion students, 5 billion thinkers, 5 billion entrepreneurs, and yes, 5 billion customers. I have no doubt that there'll be a massive explosion of economic opportunity and innovation around the world driven by the rise in connectivity. And a lot of that innovation comes from the people we at Google call the next billion users. They are people from countries like India, Indonesia, Nigeria, countries around our region who are coming online now, today. And the Next Billion Users initiative is part of our mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful for everyone. And it's a commitment to make sure that our technology works for everyone, regardless of where they live, regardless of what language they speak, and regardless of which devices or network they use. You know, some may think the next billion users are just waiting for the precious gift of the internet connection. Nothing could be further from the truth. Many of them are in the middle class, they live in rapidly growing economies, they have disposable income, and they buy smartphones and data plans. The next billion users don't need our help, they're already helping themselves. In fact, it's quite the opposite. While the internet may transform the lives of the next billion users, they in turn are transforming the internet. And as more and more of the next billion users come online, the average internet user is going to start looking more like the next billion than the first million, most of us here. And the next billion users want the same things from the internet as anyone else: access to information, entertainment, products, and services. But they are very different from the first billion in a few significant ways. The most important is that they're mobile first, and often mobile only. And they don't think of a computer as a terminal with a mouse and a keyboard. So let me do an impromptu quiz here. Raise your hand if you first started using a smartphone before you used a laptop or a desktop. If your first computing device was a smartphone than a laptop or a desktop. Raise your hands. Look around the room. There are practically, well, I see one hand raised at the back, though maybe that person was scratching their head. The next billion users, and in fact, most of the 5 billion who are going to come online now are going to be like that, where they will start using a smartphone, so they're different from all of us. So we have to think about them differently. And so the expectations of computing and the internet are very different as well. They expect their smartphones to be their wallets, so that they can do digital payments anywhere. They expect their smartphones to be their shopping portals. They expect their smartphones to be televisions. They expect local content in local languages. And because they didn't grow up typing on keyboards, They expect to interact with their computers much more intuitively. They don't want to learn computers. They want the computers to learn them. So they use voice a lot, for example. And as the world moves into this world of mobile and ubiquitous computing, we believe that products that work well for the next billion users will be products that work well for everyone. We in technology often make the mistake of thinking that technological innovation starts in places like the Silicon Valley and then trickles down to the rest of the world. But that's not true. In fact, the next billion users' expectations and behavior is what is going to drive the future. Our first story of transformation was about how the internet provides economic opportunity for people. Now let's go to the second story, about how technology can transform businesses. At Google, we believe that every business can be an online business, and that any industry can and should be a digital industry. Fishmongering, more traditional business than most, might not quite seem like the right candidate for going digital. But Haisia, a family-run seafood retailer in Singapore, is showing how the concept of a smart nation applies to all industries, old and new, big and small. Let's take a look.
我是洪维恩，我从小帮我父亲卖鱼。1976年，在玉朗鱼市场设立了海参渔业。
Haisia is not just about selling seafood. It is about our interest and pride in our produce and conducting business with integrity. The seafood industry is traditional because it's built on face-to-face relationships. My challenge is to figure out how to expand beyond this mode and reach a wider market. I know that the answer is the internet, but the question is, how do we represent our business and values online? Melvin joined us and we created the marketing department. Both of us knew what we needed to achieve, but we did not know how much it would cost and what resources we need. Google helped us realize we don't need big bucks if we know how to properly utilize digital marketing via the right marketing assets.
We were very excited to go digital. We started by making our website mobile friendly and filming a video for YouTube to enhance our brand awareness.
Apart from the branding, we also wanted to focus on increasing online sales as well as sign-ups for the fishery tour.
Our YouTube video got more than 200,000 views within 1 month. That helped us increase our website traffic by more than 5 times. What was most satisfying was seeing a 20-time increase in people attending the tour.
Personally, as a Singaporean, I want our company to be constantly innovating and improving itself, to become a digital pioneer in the seafood industry.
我希望在未来的变化中，海参能保持对这个行业的热忱和真诚。
I want Haisia to be a recognizable Singaporean brand. I want people to feel happy and excited when they eat seafood from Haisia. That's my dream. And digital is getting me there.
Isn't that just such an inspiring story? So that was the second story of technology's transformative power. Technology giving businesses new ways to grow. At Google, we've been very fortunate to have built 7 products with over 1 billion users each. Because each of these online platforms are open, anyone can use them to easily create and distribute products, services, and content. So any company now can have access to a worldwide audience, and every business can be a global business. But it's not just about digitizing existing businesses. Technology is also creating new kinds of entrepreneurs. This is Pony. She's a YouTube creator and a makeup artist from Korea. Now, as you can probably guess, I am not an expert at makeup, but others who are follow Pony's work very closely. 3 years ago, she uploaded a makeup video on YouTube. The video has 2.5 million views, and her channel today has 4 million subscribers. 4 million subscribers who every time she publishes a video, these people get a notification and get to know about it. That's higher viewership than many TV channels. Her business was basically born as an online platform. It wouldn't even have existed before the internet. Let me tell you about Dwayne Collins. Dwayne Collins is a Kiwi living in Australia, and this is his daughter, Liberty. Liberty was born with a medical condition which requires her to wear a prosthetic eye. But the available ones caused her a lot of pain. Dwayne, who was an oil rig worker, didn't want to see his daughter suffer. So over a year, he learned to make prosthetic eyes by watching YouTube videos, and finally created a perfect one for Liberty. Today, Liberty is a happy 3-year-old child, and Dwayne has started his own business creating prosthetic eyes for other children. Throughout history, new entrepreneurs, new businesses, and new industries have been created by new technology. And today we see a lot of these new technologies and new industries here in Asia. There are more smartphones here than in any other region in the world. And the mobile data traffic in Asia Pacific is almost as high as the rest of the world combined. So it's no surprise that Asia is the world's leading market for mobile-first industries like e-commerce, ride-sharing, and apps. 10 years ago, you looked to the Silicon Valley to see how technology drove new businesses. Today, I'm not so sure. I think there's a strong case for saying that you should look for the future in Asia. Let me tell you the third story about how technology can go from beyond transforming lives and businesses to creating new industries. And this one comes from our friends in Indonesia. Anyone who spent time in Indonesia knows that the best food isn't found in the 5-star dining restaurants. It's found in the modest home kitchens and the warungs, the small family-run stalls you'll find in any town or village. And each town has its own specialty, and everyone has a favorite dish. I like ayam geprek. It's a spicy fried chicken that's very popular in Yogyakarta. And if you haven't had it, you don't know what you're missing. It's really awesome. You should try it. And I think you're all familiar with Gojek. Gojek started as a ride-hailing business. But very quickly, they realized that rides didn't just transport people from place to place. It could also transport passions. The passion for cooking, or in my case, the passion for eating. And so Gojek came up with a very interesting product called GoFood that has completely transformed how the food industry operates in Indonesia. It not only digitized the food delivery business, but it has actually allowed a new industry of home cooks to emerge, which has totally transformed the restaurant scene. A restaurant in Yogyakarta today may not be the place you sit down to order food at. It may be a home kitchen, a mobile phone, and a motorcycle driver. And by freeing the home cooks from costly requirements like renting restaurant space and hiring staff, GoFood has enabled them to share their food not just with their family, but to entire cities. And in doing so, to enable them to build new livelihoods for themselves. This is Pai Nan. He's a driver with Gojek and GoFood. And he noticed that a lot of orders were coming through for ayam geprek. And like all sensible husbands, and all intelligent husbands, he believed that his wife's, Ibu Arina's, geprek was the best. And so he started working with her to sell ayam geprek on GoFood. The new income they've earned has from this roaring trade has allowed them to build a new house for themselves. And that's just by focusing on what they love most, good food. Technology and Gojek did the rest. So we've heard how technology can transform lives, businesses, and industries. For the fourth and the final story, I want to look at how technology transforms the future. One of the most amazing things about the tech industry is that just when you think you understand it, everything changes, and new possibilities unfold. There's a major shift every 10 years or so. In the early 80s, the PC revolution made computers a part of people's lives and changed how we work. Roughly a decade later, in the 1990s, the internet transformed how we think about finding information. And in the mid-2000s, smartphones brought all that knowledge into our pockets. Google was fortunate to play a role in the last two shifts, and we are fully focused on the third, the shift to AI, artificial intelligence. AI is radically changing how people interact with computers. Now, computers are adapting to people, then forcing people to adapt to them. And because this shift is happening so seamlessly, people often don't realize that they're using artificial intelligence when they talk to their phones, or search for their photos, or ask for a translation on their phone. And our approach to technology and these big shifts has always been the same. We open our technology to everyone. We open sourced Android for mobile phone makers and developers 10 years back. And that helped power the shift to mobile. 2 years ago, we open sourced TensorFlow, our machine learning framework, to power the shift to artificial intelligence. We believe that AI should be available to everyone, because we've seen that good things happen when everyone is included. We've seen some incredible use cases across industries and nations, but what excites me the most is to see what our young programmers are doing with TensorFlow. Let's take a look.
Mammograms are the cheapest imaging format there is. It's the most accessible to people all around the world. But one of the biggest problems that we see in breast cancer is misdiagnosis. So I decided that that was going to be my project, build a system for early detection of breast cancer tumors that's accessible to everyone and that's more accurate. How was I going to do it? Machine learning. It's not an easy thing to do. Data is not publicly available, and if it is, it's low quality data. It's difficult. I wasn't even sure if I could do it. And I remember just thinking about like, everyone else is building a calendar, like maybe I should do that. But I was like, no, you gotta do this. You need to.
He was talking to me about all the cool stuff he was doing, and I was telling him not to overdo it. He should just be a kid and worry about kid stuff.
The biggest, most extensive resource that I've used is this platform called TensorFlow. I've spent so many hours going really deep into these open source libraries and just figuring out how it works. Eventually, I wrote a whole system that can help radiologists make their decisions. All right, ready? Yeah. I'm by no means a wizard at machine learning. I'm completely self-taught. I'm in high school. I YouTubed and just found my way through it. You don't know about that kid in Brazil that might have a groundbreaking idea, or that kid in Somalia. You don't know that they have these ideas, but if you can open source your tools, you can give them a little bit of hope that they can actually conquer what they're thinking of.
Pretty cool, isn't it? Now just admit it, how many of you, when you were 16, woke up one morning and said, let me do this project to improve breast cancer diagnosis, right? But it isn't just Abdul Qadir. There are many young coders who are doing equally impressive things with TensorFlow. American high schooler Shaza Mehdi built an app that can identify plant diseases just by taking a photo of the plant. Polytechnic student Daniel De Leon created a program to identify blue and fin whale calls, helping scientists track these endangered species. So just imagine, how else will our children use AI to achieve a goal? And the sooner the rest of us reach this fundamental understanding, the sooner we'll all benefit from this latest technological shift. If our kids can use AI to fight cancer and conserve the environment, just imagine what governments can do if they see AI as one tool among many to improve their citizens' life. In Singapore, we have many complex problems, like national issues like aging, increasing healthcare costs. What if we could apply AI to helping those? So for the last 20 minutes, I've shared with you stories of how technology can transform lives, businesses, industries, and even countries, creating roads for economic opportunity, growth, and global solutions. But that's not to say that technology alone is the solution. We need to be able to use it well. We know there are bad actors trying to exploit technology to cause harm. And we know that the digital transformation has the potential to displace those that are unprepared. At Google, we are very serious about our responsibility to protect businesses and people. And we are just as committed to ensuring that our technology serves everyone. But the fact is, we won't always get it right. But our commitment to keeping our platform safe, open, and inclusive is unwavering. And educating people is the key to finding that right balance between using technology and preventing the bad uses. So that when people can make their own decisions on how best to protect and empower themselves, they can realize the full use of technology. And to help this, we've committed over $1 billion in grants and over 1 million volunteer work hours from our employees worldwide to support nonprofits in education, digital skilling, and inclusion. We've already trained over 25 million in digital skills, and we expect that to increase to about 60 million in the next 5 years. Too often, our response to big, daunting shifts in technology is to do nothing or to resist it until we are reassured that they'll do no harm. But the world doesn't stand still for anyone. If we refuse to engage with technological transformation, others will. In order to create the technology that we want to see tomorrow, we have to be part of the technological transformation today, which is why it's so exciting to see all of you here at the Smart Nation Week. We need to embrace technological progress. And those of you who are in a position to do so need to encourage and enable others as well, whether through government policies or responsible business practices. There is really no other way to secure our future. Can you imagine what the world would be if our ancestors had been afraid and given up on fire or language or the wheel? I know I'm being a bit ridiculous, but just to stretch the point there. And that brings me back to what I said at the start of the speech. The technology is good. And the reaction to technology we don't know how to use well isn't to stop innovating. The right reaction is to work harder and innovate even better. And that's how we'll create a bright, inclusive, and better future for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar, for that very insightful address. Indeed, we are living in exciting times, but what does the transformative power of technology really mean for nations and cities and for economies and societies? Well, let's find out from our two panel discussions. The first topic today is transforming nations and cities. Now, this panel will explore how cities and nations can transform themselves through technology and what more can be done to use technology to benefit lives through collaborations between the public, private, and people sectors. Now, but before we proceed, a quick reminder, again, you can engage in conversation with the panelists as well, and that is using Pigeonhole. So once again, we're going to pull up that slide for you, Pigeonhole at AT. So you can enter the password at SNIWeekOS, that is SNIWeekOS. So please use that platform if you have any questions or comments that you have for our panelists. Again, remember you can join in the conversation as well at Twitter, and the hashtag is SmartNation. Follow us as well at Facebook and Twitter. So first, let me welcome our moderator for this morning. He is Dr. Parag Khanna, a Senior Research Fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And Dr. Parag will be driving the discussions for both panels. So, Dr. Parag, if you could join me on stage. So let's welcome our panelists on stage today. Ms. Harriet Green, Chairman and CEO, IBM Asia Pacific. Mr. Murad Somez, Managing Director and Head of Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Global Network, World Economic Forum. And last but not least, Senior Minister of State, Dr. Janil Puthucheary.
Thank you so much, Glenda. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, ministers, delighted to join you this morning. And as I'm sure you all agree, it's been already a very inspiring set of presentations, very rich conversation. We're going to deepen that now over the next two panels that we're going to have together. Now, so often when we talk about smart nation, the conversation breaks down into smart government, smart business, smart economy, smart society. But as we well know here in Singapore, and as the discourse is also coming to realize, it's all of those things at the same time. And I want to highlight to that end, for those who missed the presentation, the speech yesterday evening by Minister Vivian, he spoke very, very eloquently about a couple of the objectives that fit under Smart Nation that I wanted to highlight. He spoke about having the best digital infrastructure, 5G, fiber optic internet, sensor networks that promote everything from digital banking, secure mobile payments, everything that contributes to lowering transaction costs and increasing trust. And he also spoke about an innovation ecosystem that is focused on smart money. And to that end, he reminded us about the Global Innovation Alliance amongst domestic and international companies that Singapore is participating in. And we heard from DPM Teo this morning about all of the many applications of technology that contribute to the smart society angle as well. Of course, things that the government is doing and bringing business in to achieve the technologies for fitness and national health care, sensor networks that lead to energy savings in our utilities, efficient and safe transit and traffic, and secure interpersonal transactions and transactions with the government, such as SingPass Mobile. So there is a lot going on right here in Singapore. There is a lot that fits under the rubric of Smart Nation, both for Singapore and all other countries to pursue as well. So to deepen on those themes, we have an absolutely fantastic panel to kick things off. Immediately to my left is Ms. Harriet Green. Harriet is CEO and chairman of IBM Business in the Asia Pacific. Prior to joining IBM, she served as CEO of the travel firm Thomas Cook Group. And in 2016, she was inducted into the Women in Technology Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that. To her left is Murat Sönmez. He is the head of the World Economic Forum Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco, which I visited last week. Open invitation to everyone to go and visit the forum's office. It's a beautiful facility, growing very quickly, and it aims to accelerate cross-sector cooperation for Fourth Industrial Revolution governance. And it's notable how many Asian countries are involved with the center already. And previously, he was the managing director and chief business officer of the World Economic Forum. And last but certainly not least, someone who we have to thank in many ways for driving so much of what we're experiencing here this week and the Smart Nation initiative in general is Dr. Janiel Puthucheary, who is currently the Senior Minister of State, Minister in the Ministry of Communications and Information, and the Minister of Transport in the Government of Singapore. He's the Minister in charge of the Government Technology Agency, GovTech. So what we're going to do in this conversation, in this panel, is to have each of the panelists give about 3 to 4 minutes of opening comments. And then we're going to have a free-flowing discussion. Get your Pigeonhole apps ready. We'll be taking comments and questions as we proceed through the discussion. And we'll probably run out of time before we want to. So let me, without further ado, kick it over to you, Harriet, to lead us in this discussion about what are your organizations, companies doing to contribute to Smart Nation?
Well, thank you. And we have just a few small minutes, I think, to add to some of the themes laid down in the opening. And I would like to start by talking about where enterprises are in the whole area of smarter nations and smarter cities. As we spend time with small startups, medium-sized companies, and pillars of every major industry, at the CEO level, at the working level, at the developer level, there are 4 major themes that appear to be converging around this huge new wave of technology. The first is, of course, the expertise of that company, which may be a little different to what they actually make. The second is the data that they create, the data that they want, the data that they need. 80% of the world's data is not searchable. It belongs to the companies that support the nations, the planets, the businesses, activities. This is sales data, roaming data, transactional data. And what companies are looking to do with that data to develop capabilities that we are discussing here today, I hope we get examples to talk about. Thirdly, the platform. You know, what platforms they use, are they a platform, their own IT systems, as they think about this new generation of cloud and AI is really, really important. But perhaps the theme that unites companies and enterprises across all of the countries is the issue of change. This exponential shift in technology, but how do businesses operationalize that and change? And then I think the final point that I hope we get to talk about, all this great talk about tech and technology, which is phenomenal. But with this greater power goes a responsibility, a deep responsibility around stewarding and being the guardians of the data of our clients and of the people that give us that data. Whether we are governments, whether we are businesses, this whole issue of data stewardship is at the very center of data and digitization. So I hope that we'll get to talk about that.
Certainly will. That raises some very interesting questions that we'll come back to. Let me first next pass it over to Murad.
Thank you, Parag. As the amount of innovation and information is exponentially growing and rapidly doing it, we're increasingly finding ourselves in what we call the too late zone. By the time we figure things out, it's too late. It's true for governments, for universities, but particularly for governance and regulation, because the technology is adapting rapidly. There's also, with all the opportunities that artificial intelligence, gene editing, 3D printing represents for citizens, there's a danger that only the privileged few will take advantage of that. And the gap that's already been increasing between the haves and have-nots will be further widened. And that's not good morally, it's not good economically, and it's not good from a society perspective. So we felt that there was a need to co-design a new operating system for the society that is human-centric in its view, and looking at projecting a future where we can accelerate and amplify the positive benefits to citizens and society, and work backwards and say, what are the protocols needed, technical protocols, regulatory framework, maybe legislation, and how can we as a global community put our heads together on a continuous basis? And that's what led us to create the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco, and we're now expanding into other countries. Our aim is to accelerate the positive benefits and ideally eliminate, but most likely minimize the negative impact. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look at AI, we need data. Where the data comes from is critical, because right now the algorithms derived from the data doesn't have a source code. There's no programmer, so we don't know what they are. So we're looking at authenticating the source of data across all Internet of Things. And blockchain could represent an interesting opportunity. Who owns the data, what you can do with it, and how you get rewarded? Again, blockchain, by the way, we're 100% buzzword compliant, so you'll see all these things from the center. So smart contracts and tokens, maybe we can set up a token exchange. How do we make sure that these devices or the algorithms are ethical? We have no control over the algorithms at the moment. We're looking at asking the machines to tell us what the algorithms are, but we don't have that technology. So maybe we can embed an ethics switch into these smart things, so that if an unethical request comes, like a car to drive into the crowd or a transformer to blow up or a medical device to kill the host, the thing will say, no, I'm not going to do it. So those are some of the opportunities and challenges we have. And finally, I'd like to talk about 3D printing. It's a revolutionary technology. It will be the new distribution channel. We'll be able to 3D print pretty much every product. So then it has huge implications on commerce and cross-border data flows. But one example that I saw recently was with ETH Zurich. It's a technical university, very prestigious in Switzerland. It's known as MIT of Europe. If you ask Linux Zelle, the president, he says MIT is the ETH of United States. They are working on a 3D printed human silicon heart. So they'll take your measurement and you'll have a 3D printed heart. Right now it beats for 2 hours and you're dead because the battery doesn't last long. And it doesn't handle the pressure. But over time it will. And as you may know, cardiovascular diseases is the #1 killer, if I'm not mistaken, including the wars. So if you have a 3D printed human heart, you will not have cardiovascular diseases. It is true. I mean, the question is who gets the benefit from it? And finally, what happens to the cardiologists? So I'll stop here and then.
On that, we'll certainly come back to that. Let's get SMS Janil, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming here. As a small, resource-constrained city-state, we can't afford to be in the too late zone. We can't afford to be the cardiologist when everybody has a 3D printed heart solving cardiovascular disease. So we see the Smart Nation effort as an opportunity to significantly transform our entire country, our economy, our society, our structure. This is not something entirely new. We began on our national computerization program 30 years ago. So much of the infrastructure that we enjoy today that's enabling what's happening around us was put in place decades ago. I thought I might string together the various pieces that you mentioned at the beginning, Parag, about the digital economy, the digital readiness, and digital government, and give you a sense of how it ties together for our Smart Nation vision, and how it becomes that vehicle for transformation. This particular wave, I said we started 30 years ago, but this particular wave started maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where we started with our cybersecurity agency. We began with security as the first part of our strategy for this wave. And then our Personal Data Protection Commission. So looking at issues of confidence, of privacy, of protection. We have enacted our Cybersecurity Act. That's come into force, our Personal Data Protection Act. We've then reorganized government and brought together talent in the Prime Minister's office under the Smart Nation Digital Government Group, Government Technology Agency to put engineering at the heart of government. We have reorganized the Infocom Media Development Authority, and we've now got, this year, the Public Sector Governance Act, looking at how public sector data protection is managed and maintained and operated. And then now we're moving into the phase of launching our digital economy framework, a digital readiness blueprint, which has already been launched actually last weekend. And then today you've just heard DPM Teo Chee Hean talk about a digital government blueprint. And then at the end of this year, we're going to start reviewing our Personal Data Protection Act all over again and start the cycle all over again. What this ties together is that scale of ambition to completely transform our country, our economy, our society. So think really big, but start small and act fast, and do it on an iterative basis. We've got to think about it in terms of processes, in terms of product, and in terms of talent. And each of these things that we do has to have a process element, a product element, and a talent element. And then break it down a little bit further. We've got our 5 national strategic projects. And each of them has key components of serving our whole economy, being an opportunity to build within government engineering talent we didn't already have, and an opportunity to reconsider a legislative and a regulatory framework that we hadn't previously tackled. We've heard some of that in the speech from Deputy Prime Minister. We've got our national digital identity, our e-payments framework, smart urban mobility, our moments of life, and our national sensor platform. We've launched all of these. We're getting the engineering talent together. We're getting our centers of excellence together. We're starting to review the regulation and legislative postures around those issues. And now we've got to move to the next tier, and that's built into our digital government blueprint. The next 30 to 50 products, platforms, and services. Not quite whole of nation, maybe 2 or 3 ministries, 2 or 3 challenges. How do they come together? And again, each of them have a few defining characteristics. There's a physical, tangible product, an opportunity for optimizing or re-engineering process and policy, and a real-world outcome in terms of improving the quality of life or efficiency or productivity, whatever it is you want to define. So that's how it all strings together. That's the big picture, but we've got to break it down to individual products and individual key deliverables, all of which interface on any number of levels. Think big, start small, act fast.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for those opening comments. And I want to actually kick off a discussion now for some minutes before we bring in the audience and the pigeonhole questions. And let me start immediately with you, SMS Janil, because you are very much the guardians of the data, the way in which actually, the sense in which you meant it, Harriet, guardians of data, because so much data is being collected and now we need to structure how it's analyzed, used, and deployed. But I also think of it very much, quite frankly, in how Plato meant it, because the role of the guardians, as he defined the role of the government in being stewards of knowledge and using it in a way that is, of course, very much directed towards enhancing public interest and welfare. So the first question really is then, what are the biggest challenges you're facing in the implementation? Because if we think about the next 3 to 5 years, there's a clear timeline. You have the roadmaps for the government for transformation in terms of promoting entrepreneurship, like you said, centers of excellence in education and so on. What do you anticipate to be the biggest challenges in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think there are 2 big buckets of challenges. One is social acceptance and how our community and our citizenry view what we're doing. And the other is getting the regulatory interventions and the structures correct in the absence of prior experience, in the absence of a model of success that's out there, when we're at the frontier of what may or may not be correct. And so a decision around legislation, a decision around regulation may actually then have a very significant downside. So in this latter space, getting that structure correct, we have taken the approach of a regulatory sandbox. This has become the buzzword du jour, that we want to put it on every piece of paper, that we are going for a regulatory sandbox. Our Monetary Authority of Singapore did this very successfully around fintech, and you can see we've moved very quickly towards being having a big bench of talent, a breadth of companies innovating around different aspects of fintech, and we want to take that approach across a number of domains where there is so much uncertainty about what the right regulatory structure is to drive innovation and opportunity, to step back, put up some boundaries, make it very clear to businesses as well as the policy side of the house that you can experiment, you should feel free to do so, provided we have clear oversight, and what you do within the regulatory sandbox will inform our regulation and our legislation thereafter. So start from the premise that we really don't know what is the correct legislation or what is the correct regulation. And you need some activity and some experimentation in order to inform that. But that is a hard sell to our population, to our citizenry, to the social side, where there is fear about job loss, there's fears around data privacy, and there's an anxiety about how much value this is to them. And we have here in Singapore a significant proportion of our population that were not educated in English, and much of the services that are available online in this digital space are delivered in English. We have the majority of our population are not what you would call digital natives. They didn't grow up with the internet. This is the experiment that Caesar just did. And so persuading them that this pace of change, that we as a nation trying to be not too late but ahead of the curve, that we as a government trying to experiment and be bold with risk-taking is of benefit to them, and sketching out that bold vision of benefit to the population. These are the two biggest challenges, I think, facing us.
Very glad you raised the issue of social acceptance. Later this week, McKinsey has its latest report coming out on smart cities, and they have a ranking framework, and it involves technology adoption, sort of GDP, wealth, but also for the first time they've done a fairly extensive survey in all of the cities that they've researched around the acceptance, if you will, of the latest technologies. And they're factoring that into the score, really, of how smart a nation is, just how informed are the public. And as we get into a situation, Harriet, where, as you say, 80% of the data that's been harvested hasn't been fully mined and in a way monetized, that's going to raise a lot of questions, because companies like IBM and others are going to be finding ways to use that data for ways that are obviously going to generate corporate benefit, but also stimulate the ecosystem. And that, of course, is going to have regulatory consequences. So could you weigh on this issue in terms of how usage of data, your plans for it, what you're seeing other companies doing, then winds up feeding into the regulatory conversation? How close is your relationship with governments, and how strong is that dialogue?
Yeah, as I raised in the opening, I think we feel that for businesses, societies, governments, this is a very central theme. Not just how the data is used, and my point was that 80% of the world's data belongs to enterprises and to companies and is not searchable. The other kind of major theme, and then I will share directly the answer to the question you asked, is around this issue of transferring unconscious, or indeed conscious bias, that many humans have into the coding and the development of the artificial intelligence and other new capabilities. And so ensuring that we have diversity and rich inclusion so that those that develop, program, code don't all look like, behave like, or come from one gender is very important. At IBM, we feel so strongly about this because for over 50 years of working with clients' data, from original transaction processing to the microprocessor to now, we've always had two simple kind of mantras. The first is the data belongs to our clients. It is not for us to take it, mine it, extrapolate it, sell it in a large knowledge graph. It is our clients' data. and we only extract the insights with the explicit knowledge of the client so that it doesn't end up in the hands of competitors and can be appropriately anonymized. So we are very concerned both at the individual level, particularly here in Southeast Asia. Do individuals understand the implications of yielding up their data for enterprises and how that data is managed and provides the greatest value and insight, and then how governments work with partners in the development of smarter cities that have this core respect and this core ability to self-regulate. Obviously, I'm European. Well, actually, I'm British, so I'm not sure if I'm European anymore, but let's assume for the purposes of this.
You have a special relationship with everyone.
Well, let's hope so. But at least, you know, the government has become very involved in issues involving enterprise data and personal data. And in North America, the emphasis has been on self-regulation. It will be interesting to see in Southeast Asia how that also develops with this huge emphasis on Smarter Planet.
This is a great point. And Murad, of course, the World Economic Forum is working with governments and trying to figure out what a new transnational regulatory framework would look like in all of these areas. And of course, there's a lot of divergence. We're seeing this with data privacy obviously playing out right now. So I would love your views on this, because there's the ethical issue, the issue of bias in AI. And again, you're dealing with governments with vastly different capacities to regulate these areas and vastly different opinions, quite frankly, on where it should go. Can there really be some kind of a common international framework on some of these issues?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So let me explain how. So I think when we look at governance, we shouldn't think about government only. So we talk about smart government here, of course, but smart governance is also possible through different levers. I'll give you an example. For example, we're working in the IoT safety protocol, going back to what Harry said about debiasing data and collecting vast amounts of data. The data will come from Internet of Things. There are 7.8 billion people, but there are going to be hundreds of billions of things. So the data from the things is going to be important. So authenticating the source is critical, making sure that the thing is the thing it claims itself to be. And this has to be universally adopted across all industries, not just vertical. It has to be built on a platform that is not under any government's control, because nobody will want the others to control it. And it has to be highly secure. This is where blockchain potentially comes in, and there's a lot of interest in that. When it comes to data ownership, we're looking at different views. You have GDPR, which has been in the works for 4 years, solving a 9-year-old problem. And right in the middle of GDPR, DeepMind beat the Go player. So they hadn't factored that into their decision making. So we have an approach where we potentially decouple who owns the data, what you can do with it, and who gets rewarded. Again, new architectures like blockchain with smart contracts and tokens enable that. And that allows the governments to create their own schemes. And then we can have a look at interoperability, because going back to what you said, Harald, about having vast amounts of data, if you look at improving agriculture yields by data collected from Singapore, it's not going to be enough. So we need to combine different data sets from different jurisdictions, and all governments are interested in improving the agriculture yield. So maybe they will be willing to share agriculture data, environment data, healthcare data, strip it out of privacy, not so much finance data. So this layered architecture is getting a lot of traction, and our approach is to do rapid prototyping. You talked about sandboxing. We're now working with 10 governments already out of San Francisco. We're opening 3 centers, and our goal is to get these prototypes implemented, take a step back and share it with the rest of the world. And we're working with China, Singapore, and pretty much every country, nation in the world, and there's one thing that they agree on, which is they want to make sure that all of this has a positive impact on their citizens and society. And the second question is what happens to jobs and skills? And the third one is, as we live longer because of all of these, with artificial hearts and gene editing and less accidents due to autonomous vehicles, we'll live to go beyond 100, 120. So what do we do after we retire at 60 is an important question, and who pays for that? So these are all common questions, and we have so far seen a very keen interest from all governments to co-design this new operating system.
So in thematic areas, there's clear a sense that that sharing in a way benefits everyone, without a doubt. So one area where certainly, not just rhetorically, but we're seeing action as well, that you raised in the beginning, I'd like all three of you actually to comment on, and this was in Murad's opening comments, was this paradox. You raised the too late anxiety, but then the examples you gave, especially around blockchain and so forth, really spoke to leapfrogging. Yeah. And so that raises this all-important issue really of technology inequality in the distribution of access and availability and people's competence to use and leverage those new technologies. So let's please have each of you comment on, and of course, without bridging that the new digital divide, you might say, you won't have the broad social acceptance that we want. So these things clearly all tie together very much. So let's just talk very, very specifically about the technology inequality, how it applies to different segments of the population, because we know that is going to be perhaps one of the key pieces of the puzzle to ensuring that everything does move forward as planned. Please, let's start with SMS Janil.
Well, we've been grappling with this for some time. You'll be familiar with the fact that Singapore has undergone several waves of economic transformation with job disruptions and new industries coming in. So in that sense, we have some experience to layer over how we might deal with this particular wave of transformation. And we've got a number of tools and processes to use, and we're maximally utilizing them. We have a few processes. We have the Future Economy Council, and we've got these industry transformation maps looking at 23 industrial sectors. And what you see as a common thread throughout all of them is the impact of technology. The impact of the technologies on jobs, the impact of technologies on the skills development and the structure of the market. So we're actively trying to shape that response together with the trade associations. We're fortunate that our unions, our labor movement, plays an active role in looking at reskilling, looking at job upgrading, rather than just trying to manage and maintain the status quo. Our unions and our labor movement are an active participant in how adequate training can be given to workers to transit them to new jobs. The next layer that we have is the adult training that we're providing through our Tech Skills Accelerator program, working with companies and adult learning facilities to look at how we can assist people to find that path themselves, get retraining and reskilling so that they are resilient to the future changes. And then, of course, we are re-engineering what's happening in the education space. The education space, in a way, is the part that I'm least worried about, because we've been working at that, and we have structures in place to try to make that responsive. The kids who are 10 to 16 today are growing up with the kind of digital resilience, the math skills and the cyber awareness that they will be able to navigate the space, but making sure we have those structures correct. So I think those are the layers that we need to work at. Adult re-education, a proactive labor movement that is assisting the process of transformation, and a re-engineering of the education process for that type of future resilience.
Now, Murad, please, especially because the World Economic Forum really does have global reach. In fact, you've been at the forefront of studying and quantifying these issues for a long time.
I think the technology matters, but what matters most is how you apply it. And I'll give you an example again from India. We're about to open a center there. I was with the health ministry, and they told me that in state hospitals, there's a doctor for every 12,000 citizens. And there's no way for them to build enough hospitals, train enough doctors ahead of the population curve. So we have this divergence potentially happening. So one scenario we have in mind is, what if we all swallow a nanoparticle once a week? And there's an FDA-approved nanoparticle today in the market. It collects your vitals. You can flush it out of your guts or sniff it into your bloodstream. Through a secure mobile connection, you upload your cellular data and vitals to the largest scientific knowledge base that has genetic data, clinical trials, environment data, and with machine learning assisted physicians, it prescribes a personal medicine for you. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, the effectiveness or efficacy of medicine on average is 50%. It ranges from 5 to 70%, and that's why the physicians say, try this and come back and let's see if it works for the most of the time. So with this personalized medicine, again, created with this vast data and machine learning techniques, we can download the prescription to your mobile phone, go to a certified kiosk and have it 3D printed. These techniques exist today. It's very expensive at the moment, but we'll see the cost curve coming down as we have seen in other devices. If we can pull that off, then we can deliver the benefit to not just a few, but the rest of the society. So that's why it's really important, as you're doing here, is to have an outcome-based orientation. Not technology-driven, but technology-enabled. Not output-oriented, but again, outcome-based, and do it fast, do it in an agile manner. And we're already seeing the benefits of this approach. So more than the technology, it's the applications that it enables. And finally, the key difference in this world is, and we did that study in Japan, when you look at shared economy, and we looked at 7 or 8 ministers' laws in different ministries. If you move towards a shared economy, there are existing laws that are in conflict with each other. So we need to go from a vertical approach to a horizontal governance approach. And if we can, again, project an outcome, prove it with sandboxes and collaboration, then we can converge into that future, which is what we have seen working on a global level.
And Harriet, of course, IBM has been at the forefront of reducing the cost of some of your even very sophisticated technologies, and also very involved in education.
Indeed. So, Watson is touching, whether it's with blockchain, whether it's with quantum computing, over 1 billion people already. And we share the view that it is changing the roles and the jobs and the skills required. So we tend to be optimistic if you look at the other huge technology transformations, the transaction processing, microprocessor, the internet, but it means that we have to put a lot back. So there are 3 levels of putting back. And here in Singapore, as an example, there are the P-Tech schools that take young people who would not have a technology degree or are not in a position to even have further education and to develop schools that are pathways to technology. So they can play a role, whether it's the 100 that we have across the world. They might not even have gone on to, a 9th grade. Mm-hmm. Secondly, it's around apprenticeships. We've just opened our first apprenticeship group, young people coming in to learn very specifically how to adapt in this new environment. And then perhaps most importantly, and Singapore is, I guess, in a very privileged position to need this, what about the people who are 30, 40, and 50 to retrain for this world of work, lifetime learning? And so programs that take people to help reskill and retrain so that they can play a part in these capabilities. So at each part of that learning curve, it's essential that technology companies put back, not just into technology and their own profits, but into the real societal needs that individual countries have.
And of course, the demographic question is particularly sensitive and relevant to Singapore, where you have second highest or highest really life expectancy in the world. A number of economists have started proposing that actually our calculations around how we do dependency ratios should really be modified, because if people are going to be working past the age of 70, then they're not necessarily just net recipients of welfare, but are still taxpayers and contributors. So let's turn to some of the questions that we've been getting here in Pigeonhole, and we'll start with one that is related to Smart Nation for SMS Janil. And it's about really how we can promote more bottom-up contributions to the Smart Nation exercise. What would you like to see, or what maybe are you already seeing, in terms of society-driven, entrepreneur-driven, student-driven kinds of smart solutions that to contribute to Smart Nation, that take advantage, of course, of now the broad technology base that Singapore has provided?
We're seeing quite a lot already. If you look at our institutes of higher learning, everything that's happening in our post-secondary space, the polytechnics, the universities, the various other institutions, almost all of them have opportunities for students who are either pursuing a tech-related course of study or a business-related course of study to actually get going with some form of incubation experience, some form of startup experience. So many of them are leaving formal education, having already had a taste of their first startup, and are now coming out into the working world, looking at their second, or thinking about the acceleration phase. Mm-hmm. We've had experience with Bash, now SG Innovate, and Block 71 and I Raja Crescent. That's become Block 71, 73, 79. This was Mr. Vivian's speech yesterday. And some of that's also going overseas. So we've got these dense startup ecosystems. We've got a crowd of kids coming through with a deep sense of both the technical side as well as the talent required in order to drive this type of startup space. And really now, I think the key next step, over and above give us more funding, please, is making sure that we have the right matching of problem statements to the types of solutions that are coming along. And making sure, again, it's not just technology going and chasing its own tail, but making sure that we really have an outcome-driven technology matching process. We're putting in some effort through IMDA and various other agencies here in Singapore to see how we can help that and curate parts of the industry that need a little bit of a help to do so. But I think the biggest part of this solution is going to come from the larger players in the industry looking at that ecosystem of partners, vendors, clients, customers, and consumers, and looking to see how to create that thrust forward for that startup ecosystem. It's happening already, and I think we can do more to plug into what's happening in the rest of the world.
Well, Caesar's presentation had very inspiring examples of bottom-up utilization of this technology, and then, of course, the ways in which that activity that's inspired by one individual can obviously spread through a society. How about from IBM's side? What kinds of examples would you?
Yeah, and particularly in Singapore, since we launched just 10 days ago, this call for code, and getting both the issues of diversity and inclusion, so all coders don't come from exactly the same place and do exactly the same thing. But here in Singapore, the response to that diversity and inclusion and the wanting to be involved in meaningful projects like disaster relief and how they themselves can participate, not just in their own society, but in wider societies, has been so exciting to see. And that's been replicated across larger communities, bigger countries and cities. But to whoever wrote in on that, that need, that desire to participate is very, very rich here in Singapore.
It is, certainly. Now, Murad, there's actually a broader question out there that I think is very well directed to you, which is, how do you know what problems need more of a technology solution versus also then measuring whether or not technology is really contributing to better outcomes? And of course, you have access to a lot of data and cross-country studies that you've done. So are we overemphasizing technology in some areas, and how rapidly are we measuring whether or not it's working?
I think we don't know what the solutions, what kind of solutions will be provided with these technologies. And if you go back to the internet, I was involved in the early stages 20, 30 years ago. It was just a connectivity platform. Then the browser came, the web happened, and now we can do all kinds of, we can have remote surgeries through the web. And when these building blocks were being built, the technologists didn't envision that world. So it became an enabling architecture. And we see these technologies, the horizontal technologies, as an enabling platform for things that we cannot even imagine today. And that's the real power of it. But we need to make sure that the governance of this operating system is geared towards accelerating the positive and minimizing the negative. Because otherwise, the bad people will take advantage of it. They already are doing that. And if we don't put the safety switches in, and not by over-regulating, because it's too early to regulate, but doing smart governance, I think we can create this enabling platform for these new solutions that we may not even think about. The other thing that we observe is, and this goes back to DeepMind and AlphaGo, beating Lee Sedol in March 2016. I took my first AI course in '87, and this was my dream to master Go. And right after these three young men, one of them is a college dropout. Mustafa left Oxford after 2 years. Right after they mastered Go, I asked one of the leading professors of AI at UC Berkeley. I said, Stu, before these young men made it happen, if I had asked you how far we were away from mastering Go, what would you have said? He said the general consensus was 10 to 20 years. So if you had asked an expert, the answer would be we're like 10 to 20 years away. So this happened 20 years ahead of schedule. So we cannot predict the future. We can do our best to shape it. And that's the approach I think we should collectively take, including society engagement and create this operating system.
Now, the first point that you made in answering that question earlier raises or feeds directly into the question that currently has the most votes on Pigeonhole, which is around data privacy. So I think it would be great if we can sort of deep dive on that a little bit more for each of the three of you, if you could. The question is very straightforward. How will citizens' data privacy be protected? And again, we're seeing really a global tug of war over this issue playing out right now. Europe taking a very aggressive lead. Debates in the US about whether or what aspects of GDPR will be adopted in the United States. And Asians clearly don't all share one view around this. So let's go down the line again before our time runs out, and let's get each of your views on this issue.
I don't know that there's a clear answer at this point in time. And I think the opportunities that are available through the analysis of data are likely to only increase. And what you want is to make sure that we all benefit from that process, and that there is a sense that citizens benefit from how their data are used to look at whether it's healthcare issues, or social issues. There is some fear and anxiety given what's happened recently, and that's very understandable. It's appropriate that we need to go and correct it and put in place the right type of protections. But I think we also want to give ourselves an opportunity to think about how it will develop in the future, not to constrain the business models, not to constrain the business opportunities, but make sure that ultimately citizens have recourse to either appeal, to challenge, and to secure their privacy. And I think those are the mechanisms that are very important. For us, we have separated out our regulatory space into the private sector and how companies and consumers deal with companies deal with their consumers and clients, and the public sector. We found that actually, given some of our data sharing arrangements, data acquisition arrangements reached back 30, 40 years, we have put in place so many internal controls that sharing within the public sector became a problem. The expectation of citizens that different aspects of government were able to share data in order to provide what was seen as useful services was not present. And so we passed some laws, now the Public Sector Governance Act, to actually increase within government and within public sector data sharing. But interestingly, as part of that, we then tightened external controls in terms of criminalizing some acts and so forth. So that type of balance between creating opportunities by unlocking some of the barriers and reassuring the public by putting in stringent controls. I think you need to do both in lockstep as you go forward.
Absolutely. So it's an experiment that's really unfolding. And I think while the global conversation is focused elsewhere right now, the Singapore experiment is in fact very instructive. Murat, final point on that?
Yes, given the technologies, again in blockchain space, it is now possible to decouple who owns the data, what you can do with it, and who gets rewarded. And the government can say, look, you own your gene data, and I can say, I want to be able to say, anyone can use it for cancer research free of charge. But if you want to use it for medicine discovery, ask for my permission and give me money. And we're seeing this rapid protocol development in the technical space, like Oceans or Fetch.io, which Singapore is already using. We had a breakfast about that. So we think that decoupling will give us the flexibility and the ability for the government to assign the rightful owner, for the owner to choose to say when his or its or the company's data can be used, and who gets rewarded. And we also envision the creation of national token exchanges, where the companies who use these data from the owners can issue company tokens and they can be exchanged.
If data really is the biggest single resource, if it is the commodity, the oil of this generation, then I think it is inevitable that there are three levels that are on people's minds, whether we do forums with Generation Zers or meet and talk with esteemed CEOs, there seems to be three levels. The first is an individual responsibility around data. And certainly here in Asia, maybe some of the influences from Europe, people realize that their own data is valuable, needs to be treated with respect, that you understand your settings, and that you're not just contributing to a very small number of companies becoming very wealthy on the back of your data. So I think there is a personal responsibility, and in the forums that we've been holding, increasingly that issue of your job and your work around the resource is important. Secondly, and I think we've already talked about this, companies clearly stating what they do with your data in terms of their terms, their conditions, their actual actions. And that is so critical right now, because as we begin to create algorithms, data platforms, and capabilities that are powered by artificial intelligence, those algorithms, that data, and who programs them have even greater importance. And then, as I think beautifully put, governments being able to balance the need to be able, as the Deputy Prime Minister, I thought, beautifully shared, that from the minute you start to live in a country, the information that's valuable to your education, to your environment, is immediately made available. And marrying those means you need to have trusted partners, and I think a real sense of responsibility, not just profits.
Well, this field around smart cities and smart nation has evolved very rapidly in just the last 2 or 3 years, let alone the last 10. So I want to thank our panelists for really bringing us up to the state of the art across all of these issues. You've answered a lot of questions and raised some more that we're going to continue discussing today. But first, at the moment, let's please all join together in thanking our distinguished panelists for their contributions. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Harry. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our panelists for a very thought-provoking conversation there. You know, how we hold the future. The data is in our hands. Not to be careful not to be in the too late zone, as well as, you know, left behind nation. So, Dr. Parag, why don't you just, you know, sum up some of the key takeaways from this discussion for us?
The term that wasn't used that really resonates in my mind is a sort of secure connectivity, right? There is such a premium on security of data, given its availability and given all the tools that the public sector is making available, and yet wanting to make sure that we have more and more opportunities to connect to each other. So how do you balance security and connectivity? And that's where the privacy questions come in. And I think the conversation was very sophisticated around that issue, around privacy. And I think it was very good that the issue of personal responsibility was also raised. Now we have governments in the regulatory space that are trying to encourage that responsibility, but also make sure that the technology sector, which is becoming so powerful, and we'll be talking about that, of course, in the next panel, has a very important role in transparency there as well. And I think one of the other important things that came out this morning was the multi-stakeholder dimension. It's a term that the World Economic Forum itself really pioneered. This conversation was so balanced across what the public sector, the private sector, civil society, universities have to do together. And I think that's what whole of society is all about. And in Singapore, clearly we're talking a lot about that. And there's optimism around the opportunities to leapfrog. And it's not just in digital technology, but biomedical and all sorts of other areas. And Smart Nation, as much as today we emphasized a bit more the digital, is certainly a lot more when we think about human needs, the demographic changes, and so forth. And then one area which I know we'll also start to get into is around standards internationally. And that's critical because, of course, Singapore is a smart nation, but a small nation. And we want to see these standards share and spread to enlarge the pie, create more opportunities, not only in the spirit of the examples that Caesar gave, but of course because economic integration is going to create a whole new playing field, if you will. So I think standards become very, very important. And lastly is about the final point that was made was about individuals being able now to monetize that data. What are they going to do with their own data, with the data that's being unlocked that can now be used by entrepreneurs? What impact is that going to have in rippling across the economy?
Right, and that bleeds very nicely into the next panel discussion, and that is economic transformation. It will explore on how societies and economies should react to a digital world, and how individuals and industry can become constantly innovative and adaptive, being ready to seize opportunities and harness the potential of technology. And to share their insights on this topic, we have with us today Senator Michaela Cash, Minister for Jobs and Innovation, Australia. We also have Mr. Shalindra Singh, Managing Director of Sequoia Capital. And last but not least, Mr. Piyush Gupta, CEO and Director of DBS Group. And if we could welcome them on stage for this next panel discussion. Thank you.
Australia. Moving right onward, a great segue it was. Thank you, Glenda, for that, because indeed we want to talk now about economic transformation, and that is in so many ways the metric that we use, although I think one of the very important things about Smart Nation more broadly is that we think beyond just measures such as economic growth, but what is achieved through economic growth, through full participation in the economy, which is going to be a big theme, is of course the positive societal spillover effects that has. And so I think that's going to be a very important theme for us to dive into. We have a perfect panel to do this, really representatives from government, the financial sector, the technology sector. So I'm very, very delighted to kick off this second panel with, immediately to my left, the Honourable Senator Michaelia Cash, who is the Minister for Jobs and Innovation for the Australian Government. She was first elected to office in the year 2007. She was previously the Minister for Employment, Minister for Women, Minister for Assisting the Prime Minister for Public Service. So very rich cross-governmental set of experiences. Looking forward to your views. Immediately to her left, Shailendra Singh, who is the Managing Director at Sequoia Capital, one of course the world's leading venture capital firms. He has led Sequoia's investments in Carousel, Gojek, Credex, Zilingo, and many other companies that are all neologisms in their names, I'm sure. A lot of which, certainly Gojek and others that are very much household names and coming to a street in Singapore near you, as I'm sure everyone knows. And you're also a Kaufman Fellow, and you previously founded Jalva Media in Silicon Valley. And indeed, to his left, Piyush Gupta, who's CEO and director of the DBS Group, one of the leading financial services groups in Asia, with a growing presence in Greater China, Southeast Asia, very much a pan-Asian bank, and growing as Asia grows, which is very promising. DBS is, of course, headquartered here in Singapore, and the bank has been recognized for its leadership in the region. It has been conferred the honor of Asia's best bank by The Banker and Euromoney, and Asian Bank of the Year by IFR Asia. So again, a very, very distinguished panel. I'm excited to kick off with the same format that we had before. We'll have each of you contributing for a couple of minutes around where you see the digital technologies contributing to economic transformation. Love to hear your experience from the Australian angle, which a country that has been quite steadily moving up to the top of many Smart Nation rankings and industries because of the policies that your government has been pursuing. So please, Michaelia.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute to what I think is a really important conversation today. I mean, from the Australian government's perspective, we very much look at this global economic transformation as something that within Australia we have to see as a government, as industry and as a society as being what we now call business as usual. There is no option. From our perspective as a government, we very much take a three-pronged approach. The first is obviously government must lead by example. And the way you can lead by example is ensuring that you have a public service, because obviously government controls the public service. You have a public service that is innovative and is adaptive. And that is certainly something that as an Australian government we are focusing on. The second pillar, though, is obviously, as a government, you've got to put in place the right policy framework so that industry, so that business can prosper and grow. I mean, I often say to people that governments themselves don't create jobs. That's the role of industry, that's the role of business. So you need to ensure as a government you are fostering the right environment for that job creation. And of course the third pillar, which I think has been touched on by all speakers, but in particular by Caesar in his keynote address, as a government we need to ensure we are bringing all Australians with us. The opportunity to participate in the digital economy must be afforded to everybody. Later on this year, the government will be releasing our digital economy strategy. It is very much based around 5 pillars. The first is, of course, connectivity. If you don't have connectivity, you actually can't participate. So what is the role of government in providing that economic infrastructure? Digital skills for everybody. As I said, bring all Australians with you. So what is the role of government in ensuring that all Australians, regardless of who you are or where you come from, you have the relevant digital skills. We have to have a really good look at our regulatory environment. This is a new world. We need to ensure that in Australia, we're encouraging businesses to foster and grow, but at the same time, we've got 24 million people. We need to ensure that other parts of the world are looking to us and saying, we want to invest in Australia. I think another key point that we're looking at is access to all businesses. It's always interesting to hear, big businesses put their perspective forward, because I think it's well known, big businesses are able to adapt for so many reasons. So the role of government, in particular in Australia, is to ensure that we're enabling our small and medium businesses to get the digital skills they need so they can participate in this economic transformation. And of course, then overlaying all of that, I think, is an absolutely fascinating conversation. And it's, of course, cybersecurity. What is the role now of cybersecurity? If we are all going to be participating in this economic transformation, it is going to be business as usual. What are the cybersecurity implications? So from the Australian government perspective, a three-pronged approach based around those pillars.
Both yourself and DPM earlier today raised this specter, and it's critical because, of course, the downside scenarios are truly worrying, and we should have an even more robust conversation in other places, such as is taking place here, around what the consequences and what preparations are needed. Shailendra, Sequoia is such an important part of the growth story of digitization, of economies here in Southeast Asia, certainly worldwide already. You're making bigger and bigger bets in Asia, so let's hear it from your point of view around economic transformation.
Yeah, first, thank you. It's an honor to be here, a great privilege. I'm Shailendra Singh. I've been at Sequoia for a little over 12 years. And during this time, I've focused on investments in emerging markets in India and Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia in the last 5 or 6 years. And I've had the privilege to meet maybe 7, 8, 10,000 entrepreneurs, something of that order of magnitude in the last 10 years, 12 years. And it's been the most uplifting and humbling experience to look at young companies and see them grow in this part of the world. And as Sequoia, our motto for the last 46 years, Sequoia is a Silicon Valley firm, started with the objective to help partner with founders to create enduring companies that could last generations, sort of outlive ourselves. And as we went down that journey, and we were very lucky to partner with some incredible founders over the years, we realized about 12, 13 years ago that innovation was going to become highly democratized. And China, India, Asia specifically, and this region would play an extremely important role. And so about 13 years ago, Sequoia decided to start Sequoia China. 12 years ago, decided to start India. And fast forward today, we have now made close to 600 to 700 investments in technology companies all over Asia. And
out of a potential hundreds of thousands, because you get more PowerPoint decks every day than the rest of us put together right now.
Correct. Well, we have this incredible privilege of partnering with founders who are sort of shaping the future and sort of get a front row seat to that. And we couldn't be more excited about what's happening in Asia. And this is a little bit double clicking on what Caesar said in the morning, that it's quite likely that the center of technology in the world is now shifting to Asia. And I don't think many people in Silicon Valley have fully appreciated it yet, but the pace and rise of tech companies in China, in Southeast Asia, and India is simply staggering. And there is 2, 3 main drivers of it. One is that, like I said, innovation is highly democratized at this point. It no longer matters where a company is born. It no longer matters, how much money a set of engineers have to launch their new product or service. Because, there's so much capital available to fund innovation all around the world at this point, or at least in most parts of the world, that, a small team sitting in a city that most people can't pinpoint on a map can, overnight get hundreds of millions of downloads around the world. And so that's the other thing, the spread of technology has also gotten democratized with the rise of app stores and so on and so forth. And then the third is the mobile device, sitting in the pocket of people, millions of people. And this is where Asia, with 4 billion people, Asia Pacific region, it's just a very powerful market driving all the future trends. So we couldn't be more excited about everything we've seen here. And we are very, very bullish
on what we see in Southeast Asia, in China, in India, and more interestingly, the convergence of companies across these markets. So it's no longer, we constantly have these internal, very, sometimes fun discussions and arguments saying, where does a company belong? Because we can no longer say where a company belongs. Because it may be, the engineers may be based in one country, it may be domiciled in a second country, and the usage may be in another country. So, and we have routinely ended up investing in companies. So we call this, this thesis of blurring borders. And I think, Singapore has actually a very important role to play, in my opinion, in what's happening in Asia. And I find, for whatever it's worth, people in Singapore actually very significantly underappreciate how strong the tech ecosystem already is and how fast it's evolving. So in the last 5-6 years, I've had a chance to observe it closely, and I'm very, very pleasantly surprised by how exciting Singapore is in terms of how it's emerging into a tech hub, and I'm quite optimistic about that.
Piyush, no doubt you are as well. You're a financial CEO, but also in a way a tech company CEO. You've become a digital bank, very much so at DBS. So, and of course, everyone in Singapore, it's the largest bank, of course, in the country. So, how are you seeing, not just in Singapore, but Pan-Asian as you expand beyond and blur the boundaries very much the way the tech companies are? How are you seeing the economic transformation play out?
So Parag, I thought what I might do is focus a little bit on our industry, and perhaps that's a good case study to think about how industry transformation is actually occurring. And I thought I'd talk about three things. One, industry transformation. Second is participant or firm transformation. And third is, some obviously upsides or potential unintended consequences of this kind of transformation. So in category one, industry transformation, some things are obvious. You talked about mobile, so did Caesar earlier. I think mobile is a game changer for banking because in the past, you went to a bank. Today, the bank goes with you. And because the bank goes with you, it changes the context of what a bank means. Location, context become extremely important. I sometimes say the vision for banking in the future is to make banking invisible, because you can hide the bank and what you're really doing with the rest of your life and what you want to do. And that thinking is quite a game changer for our industry. What does it mean for, what is the nature of banking itself? The second is this whole idea for network economy, shared economy. Earlier, it was quite simple. You had savers who saved, which is the households, and corporations and entities borrowed. Well, today is quite different. The individuals borrow, individuals lend money, companies borrow, companies lend money. So you don't have consumers and producers. You have a world of prosumers. Mm-hmm. And as you think about blockchain and overlay that on the network economy, that notion that you could eliminate a hub and spoke mechanism, everybody can participate, everybody directly, can have really profound consequence for industry structure. Most of financial services is based around stock exchanges, banks, central banks, so central keepers of records. In a distributed ledger economy, you don't need central keepers of records anymore. So what does that mean for industry structure? It's still something that needs to be played out. Third agenda is, we just talked about data. Obviously, data is a big thing. Somebody called data the new oil. I think data is more than the new oil. I think data is the new air. Because oil you can still ring fence and control. Air you can't. I think that's important because when everybody thinks about regulating data, I think 2 years from now with 5G and IoT, the amount of data you will be spraying out, you will not be able to control. So we really have to think hard about what Murad says. What are the guiding rules for data? But that data has important consequence, obviously, for our industry. How do you underwrite credit? How do you do trading with algorithmic trading? How do you use robotic process automation? And what does it do for efficiencies? And finally, obviously, cloud and just the automation compute power, the curve, the cost curve means everybody can get into the game. You just don't need scale to be a participant. Now, these last two things have profound implication for industry participation. So who plays in this new industry? The value chain is unbundling. You can be a startup and be a small fintech and unbundle some part of the value chain. I think most of the small startups wind up being collaborators with existing players. But you also have the big companies, the Googles, Facebooks, and Alibabas, who have ownership of customer and ownership of data, which now becomes the central theme around which participants need to organize. So I think you can have very dramatic change in industry participation as you go forward, with some of the big tech oligarchs playing a really important role in the future of the industry. Now, these have all profound consequences at an industry level. At a firm level, you alluded to this. We've taken a lead. We're privileged to be named the best digital bank in the world. But we've had to rethink everything. How do we acquire customers? We used to acquire through brick and mortar, branches, relationship managers. Now it's all electronic. How do you transact without paper so you can do instant fulfillment? That changes the cost point, but changes the way people deal with you. How do you engage with customers differently so that you can use data to market contextually at the right time? One of the main changes we had to make in our thinking is, we were a pipeline business. We went direct to customer. But increasingly, you have to learn how to work with partnerships in an ecosystem. That's a very profound difference in the way you actually run your firm at a bank level. So there are quite important changes to how the firm needs to run. But quickly, the third point, I think all of this means that there could be some upsides, but there could be some downsides as well, reflecting on, again, in the context of our industry. You take data. The good news with data is you can do financial inclusion. So today you can reach out to hundreds of millions of people through M-Pesa, through the Jan Dhan Yojana in India, millions of people who will not have access to financial services. Good news. Bad news. A large part of our industry's models have been created on socialization of risk. It's based on the premise that you don't know. You think about insurance. Insurance exists because all of us share the risk because we don't know who's likely to have an accident and who's likely to fall in. So we all share the premium and everybody gets protection. Once you do know, that leads to financial exclusion. Because if I know for sure that you're going to have cancer and you're not, I won't insure you. But you don't need the insurance. So what does that mean for the model of the insurance industry? So you've got to think a little bit about unintended consequences of data in our industry. The second unintended consequence is around the idea of jobs. We are today very proud as the leading digital bank in the world that we are automating and digitizing everything. My branch staff is down by half. My call center staff is down by half. I'm using robotic process automation. But what does it mean to the nature of jobs? What does it mean to where the jobs come from? Yep. I mean, think about, when the car got created, Henry Ford said then, when people asked him who'll buy a car, he said the workers will buy the car. Well, what happens if there are no workers, then who buys the car? So you've got to think a little bit about the unintended consequences of, that. And finally, this unintended consequence of the change in the industry structure. I think it's a great thing that there's a lot of participation in the industry. But we also know from just recently, 10 years ago, that the lack of oversight and regulation can create substantial systemic risk. At the end of the day, money greases the oil, the engines of the economy. But unregulated and unsupervised and unlegislated actors and activities could create a lot of systemic risk in the system as well. And that's not something we understand and know. So we need to think a little bit about that as well as we go forward.
Excellent opening points, and I hope that everyone by now has tweeted, data is the new air. Very memorable, and we will come back to that point as well because there's a lot to be said for what that means for the economy. What each of you have spoken about to some degree, and there's been some overlap, and it's the issue that I wanted to, in any case, move into for a more in-depth statement from each of you, is really about which industries need the most digital transformation, which need to be digitized the most, or as they're digitized, which are creating the most unintended consequences, as Piyush just mentioned, in terms of dislocation. And you have a whole very large country, not a large population, but a very large country that you're working with. So give us now the real world, ground eye sort of view around where you are struggling the most. And just a one word of context, in Singapore, we went through the Committee on Future Economy process, and I served on one of those committees, and one of the responses to it was, well, where's the plan? Where's the single bullet sort of answer? And it was, to me, a lesson in sort of almost communication. Maybe people didn't realize that this is one of the most diverse economies in the entire world. For such a small country, almost every single possible industry, with the exception of really agriculture, is strongly represented here. And so you cannot have a silver bullet answer for what industrial transformation is going to look like, because every industry will have to go through its own learning curve and have its own roadmap. So with that in mind, looking at a much larger country of Australia, where are you seeing the toughest pain points in the transformation of specific industries to keep pace with technological change, and what are you doing about it?
It's a fascinating question, and Australia has actually been transforming now for many, many, many years. I mean, you look at our economy is very much a resources-based economy. So we have a mining industry that quite literally now for 10, 15 years has been looking at the impact of automation. And in fact, we actually are the #1 country when it comes to automated mining. So we've already been through what is the impact of automation on literally your economy, and how do you embrace it and create more jobs, and we've done that successfully. I think probably though the most recent issue of the impact of this transformation on the Australian economy is in relation to our car industry. I mean, many people would be aware that last year, the 3 major car manufacturers in Australia, Holden, Ford and Toyota, they actually closed their doors. That was obviously a significant impact on our economy. We had a very long and proud history of manufacturing cars in Australia, but our reality became we could no longer, or the companies could no longer effectively compete in that global market. But I think the strategies that were put in place by government and by the companies working with the unions and the employees meant that for a number of years we were able to put in place processes that ensured that while yes, you were seeing the end of an industry in Australia, which meant the end of thousands of jobs, the process that was put in place took us back to ensuring that the companies worked with the workers to ensure that they had a very long lead time to be appropriately skilled into higher tech jobs that were going to be available within the car manufacturing industry, even if we weren't manufacturing cars. Or alternatively, they identified where other opportunities were throughout Australia, recognised what the skills gaps were, and then worked with the employees to give them the appropriate skills. It is actually the example of what is a good news story. An industry has closed down in Australia, thousands of jobs were affected, but to date, in excess of 80% of those employees have gone on to either work for the relevant companies in another role, have taken on alternative employment, have gone on to full-time study, or have voluntarily left the workforce. And those companies now continue to work with the remaining workers to ensure that they are able to continue in the workforce.
And this is an all too uncommon story because there are only a few countries where we're seeing this happen. Switzerland is one, Germany is another, Korea, and Singapore is working on this as well, though of course not in the automotive sector, but others. But it's a very, very rare success story. And this is really what inclusive growth is all about. It's not just about the bottom billion, but it's about these industrial transformations. I actually do want to come back to another industry in Australia, maybe in the next round though, but it is education, because, or maybe even right now, let's just talk about it, because it's a very large, one of the fastest growing sectors, and it's being digitized. A lot of Singaporeans and other Asians have an experience with physical education at an Australian campus or coming back. But I think it would be interesting to talk about the role of digital education as an export, because it is a large and growing Australian export. And Singaporeans are going to be very interested in that for ourselves and for our children.
International education is something that Australia is incredibly proud of, and in fact it is our 3rd largest export industry. So it is something that as a country we acknowledge, we have a good product and we need to do everything that we can to ensure that it remains as a key destination country for others looking in. I think the key to the Australian education sector though is the realisation that the way that we used to educate is not going to be the way we educate in the future. And it very much goes back to, and in fact your previous panel discussed it, it's the new approach to learning, lifelong learning. In fact, we often say in Australia, the way you're going to have to literally as an individual now approach learning going forward is you'll learn, you'll unlearn, you'll relearn, and it's how our education institutes respond to that. And I think one of the most effective ways of responding to that is to enable all courses to be done online, but ensuring that you have the quality in terms of the degree or the course that you're actually offering. And I think Australia has been doing this now for a number of years, probably because though it is one of our greatest exports, and we know that we have to continually invest in it. But it's all about adaptation, and that is something we're good at.
And Singaporeans now are literally born with their education passports. And so
absolutely, and we obviously welcome Singaporeans to Australia.
Which global online degrees can be fed into that passport. It's very, very exciting. Now, a lot of this has been made possible because of the foundational layer of technology that particularly large technology providers have put in place. And this is one of the really transformative shifts. Infrastructure, such as we think of it, has historically been provided largely by the public sector. But when it comes to internet connectivity, and as we move into 5G, it really has been the private sector in most of the world, with exceptions obviously like China, but the private sector has been providing this base. And that has also, of course, both from a standpoint, from a financial standpoint of the size of the technology sector, and of course the data that they have access to and control, that has created sort of big tech. So when people think about digital transformation of the economy, Shailendra, they generally think, they almost hold it to be synonymous with the big tech companies. So let me get your view on, are we at a point where big tech is the new foundation for digital transformation, or where big tech is viewed, rightly or wrongly, as almost taking over too much of that pie?
Yeah, first, I think we are in an unprecedented time in history where 7 of the world's 10 largest market cap companies are tech companies. And if you counted the market cap of the top 10 companies in the world, 78% of that market cap belongs to tech companies, just in the top 10. Now, that's not representative of the whole economy, but you could say in the most powerful 10 companies, there's an 80-20 market cap of tech companies, which is staggering. Now, what's even more scary is that these tech companies are actually growing faster than the rest. Many of these companies are still compounding at 30, 40, 50%. So I think on the one hand, as we think 5, 10 years out, not very distant future, near-term future, we're going to see continued this strength and might of the big tech companies continue to grow. And I think it has lots of implications for society, for innovation, for regulation. I think governments will be, in a bipolar world, governments will be working harder to figure out how to regulate and how to ensure data privacy, how to ensure fair practices, how to ensure level playing field, from a regulatory perspective for things like financial services and fintech we were chatting about this morning. So I think lots is going to come. But I'd say one thing which is very interesting about Asia and when it comes to tech. I think all the traditional tech companies were built with a technology-first mindset, meaning that they mostly evolved with thin layers of technology. On a new area, it could have been software, it could have been search, it could have been social networks, it could have been messaging in the case of Tencent, or an e-commerce platform. But now tech has become so mainstream, and the amount of capital available to new tech startups is so extraordinary in the last 5-7 years, that we see the emergence of what we call the full stack business models, meaning it is no longer just about tech. It is about the combination of a traditional industry and tech with call it a full stack approach. So think how the world has evolved, where Netflix is now a very large creator of content, which it wasn't initially. Or Amazon has now bought Whole Foods, or in China you hear about new retail. So this convergence of tech and non-tech. And we have multiple examples in our portfolio. We have a company called Oyo Rooms that is disrupting the budget hotel segment all over India and now in many markets, including in China. And they take full ownership of the user experience. So it's not just an OTA or an online travel agency, which was called the first generation model. So the new generation models will be cloud kitchens. So now imagine you don't need to have McDonald's where people have physical stores like we were hearing in the morning. But we have a company that has 6 online brands of food where people order food, and you go to all these brands and they're highly reviewed and rated, but they're just cloud kitchens. There's no actual physical store you walk into, and they work only on delivery. Similarly, there is virtual hospitals in China coming up where, hey, you'll go online, you'll select a great surgeon, and then you'll go to WeWork type hospital location, which is for rental, and you'll get your surgery conducted, but it'll be it'll be shared infrastructure. So I mean, we live in a very interesting
hospital. Is that what it's called? We hospital.
Yeah. So I think we live now in a very interesting world where we are going to see, not just the traditional form of tech companies which only do technology. We are going to see fully integrated companies like take WeWork. It's not really a tech company. They have physical spaces all around the world. So we're going to see more and more of these full stack business models, and the implications are the traditional companies, traditional incumbents across every industry are going to see much more of a frontal assault by a new entrepreneur and a newly imagined business model. We call them mutants, sort of a business model that mutates. the mutants are attacking the traditional incumbents in most industries. And the full stack, we have a investment in a company that's trying to now, do sort of disintermediate telcos and create a mobile-oriented, full stack telecom application without owning any of the infrastructure. So I think across industries, we're going to see this new trend. And to that extent, I think there is, while the existing companies become more and more dominant, I think it's a little scary. Imagining that some of these companies could be worth $3, $4, $5 trillion if you take a 10-year view, and whether traditional industrials will keep up. On the other hand, I think these new wave of companies will also come up, and their models are sufficiently different with this full stack approach that they will create new kinds of companies altogether.
I hope this is raising lots of questions that everyone is going to put into a pigeonhole, because we'll be coming to your questions in just a little bit.
Parag, let me just quickly amplify, Sharon, before you throw it open. So one, I couldn't agree with him more. So I think your question's a flawed question. We're saying which industry is likely to be more impacted. I think that's a wrong way to think about it. There is no industry which will not be impacted, because today technology is business. And I think the right way to think about it, therefore, is the horizontals. So what is it, you think about Uber. Uber is not about technology. It's about reimagining what people want to do when they travel. And so all of the examples Sharon gave tell you that thinking in vertical industries is the wrong way to think, because you're not going to get the mutant ways of thinking, which are horizontals, which means everything's going to be impacted. The other comment on what Sharon said, I think he's right. There's a lot of centralization of power on the one hand. I do think there's always the opportunity, increasingly the mutant opportunity. I do think also, however, that legacy companies do have an opportunity to play, because legacy companies have exactly the same recourse to modern technology. In fact, this technology is open. What Caesar said, it's all open source. You can go take what you want and piece it together. So the real question is, how do you change your mindset? And change your mindset to really think horizontally, think in terms of journeys, think in terms of customer experiences, as opposed to think vertically. And if you can achieve that, then frankly, anybody can be a player. Now, unfortunately, because this winner take most or winner take all is true, people who are first to market and have created disproportionate customer bases and disproportionate market size will always have an advantage. It's not easy to go up against.
And just to emphasize the importance of the traditional companies, when you refer to shared infrastructure, actually, it is owned infrastructure that is being made available for partial usage. And just look at the automotive industry, for an example. BMW and others call themselves mobility companies now because they own the assets. So indeed, the role of traditional firms is still very important. Owning the pipes, if you will, which banks, of course, still very much do, actually underpinning financial transactions. The best way to get at how cross-cutting all of this is, because I agree with Piyush's point that one can't just have a siloed view, is to humanize it further. So let me just follow up with you, Shailendra, on this and talk about the sharing economy, the gig-onomy. Because, of course, if you are in the gig-onomy, which more and more people are if you look across the world, that means that you are sector agnostic in some ways. You're doing a bit of ride sharing, a bit of Airbnb and accommodation. Can you take us into the future, the next 3 to 5 years? What are the gigonomy areas of employment that you expect more jobs to be created in and people to be working in? So in China, it's logistics, right? Enormous increase in employment in the logistics sector as a result of the new peer-to-peer mechanisms and gigonomy. What about here in Singapore and in our immediate environment?
So first, I'll start with an anecdote. I had the privilege to be in the room in Sequoia's U.S. offices one day in 2009. When we discussed a $600,000 seed investment in a company, which asked people to share their extra room, with strangers, and that company became Airbnb, and at the time when we sat around the table and discussed, saying, look, this company's value proposition is that it will allow people to have strangers live in their homes, and. Think about it, in 2009 for the first time, and it was very small, and it was a seed investment. I mean, many of us around the table had doubts and concerns, saying, really, like, will people allow strangers to live in their homes? And, for a small fee or what have you. So, obviously, Airbnb has grown on to become this, humongous company, and it's, a huge example of the sharing economy. And it has, I think the point I'm trying to make is it's far surpassed our expectations. We could not have possibly imagined, even in our, at that time sitting around the table, even as we were deciding to invest, that this might possibly play out in the manner it did. And so the first point I want to make is, in the ways in which shared infrastructure, shared workforces, etc. might play out will surprise us by their scale and the disruptive power that they might possess. So the first thing is, we think this is a very significant trend. Like, I haven't owned a car now for 3 years. And of course, I'm sad that there's no Uber here anymore in Singapore, which I think many of us in the room are. But I've stuck to my resolve to not buy a car so far. And I'm hoping Gojek will arrive soon. But
I can see you're not a fan of Grab for some reason.
No, well, I'm biased, shareholder in Gojek, so I'll wait for them. But I think the implications are very vast. Like I gave the example of restaurants and so on and so forth, of logistics, like you said. But I'd say one more thing. I'll come back to education since we were talking about it. One of my favorite new examples is a company called Unacademy we invested in India. And Unacademy allows anybody to be an educator and anybody to be a learner. And so people are self-taught. They can go learn courses. They can participate in exams. And the interesting thing they've found is that very many good students who have, let's say, cleared an exam are ending up becoming top teachers, on their platform. So the teachers of today are no longer, and so now coming back to this, call it the new gig economy. The teachers of today are no longer the teachers that you might have thought are the teachers, but they're actually students themselves who are teaching other students. And they have this example of a kid who's in college, who's doing extremely well now, taking paid classes, live paid remote classes on their platform, and earning significantly more than maybe he will even on graduation. But while he's still in college, because he's teaching other kids to ace the exam that he just aced himself.
Can I just make a quick comment as well, just on the gig economy and everything you've raised, because it's a question in Australia that we're currently looking at, obviously from the governmental perspective. The gig economy in Australia is only about 1%. Okay, so despite all of the talk about it is still a very, very small part of our economy. But you are so right, it is just rapidly growing. And the issue that we then have as a government is, how do you regulate a gig economy to ensure that you continue to let it expand at this rate, but at the same time, you ensure that people are properly protected within it, in particular from the work health and safety implications. In Australia, as you know, we have a minimum wage. How do you ensure that people are being paid appropriately if they're not within the current workplace relation structure? So I think from a government's perspective, there are also so many questions that we need to grapple with to ensure that we're not stifling the gig economy, we're letting it expand, but doing so in a responsible manner.
And people are asking actually about, again, sort of deep diving, not just on gig economy, but just generally private sector-led innovation. And if where is that coming from in Australia? If it's,
Absolutely. I mean, in Australia, we actually have some world-renowned inventions that people are relying on here in this room. Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was invented in Australia. I don't think there are too many people who actually know that. The black box, many people would have flown here today. The black box was invented in Australia. The cochlear implant, transforming, in particular, young children's lives. So in Australia, we have a proud history of innovation, but in terms of the actual sectors that the innovation is coming from, I think in particular, automated mining, we lead the world and we do not intend to fall behind. We have also just announced, though, the creation in Australia of a completely new industry with the creation of the Australian Space Agency. This is something that, because of our unique location globally, we have so much that we can actually now bring to the global space economy. So we very much have a proud history of innovation in Australia, but in particular when it comes to, say, mining, space technology, but also the growing areas of where jobs are being created in Australia. Very much our National Disability Insurance Scheme, our healthcare industries, again, huge burgeoning markets, and in particular innovative markets. We have a very, very large country in Australia. The way we deliver services is fundamentally different to so many other parts of the world. So in Australia, you have no choice. You need to be innovative to ensure that as a government, you are providing services.
So there are many sectors of the Australian economy that are looking to regionalize, Asianize a lot more, and of course, not just with respect to China, where you already have such a large trade investment partnership. So the more digitally connected you are, the better. That applies in spades to Singapore. So I actually want to turn to you, Piyush, on this very important question, because there's, in our neighborhood, any number of countries whose regulatory systems are distinctly analog compared to what we have going on here. And yet the paradox is that, quite frankly, today you can't properly measure the GDP of any country without taking into account the value of the flows of capital, trade, goods, people, other forms of cross-border mobility. So one of the frustrations, of course, for the financial industry is that we don't yet have that fully borderless, frictionless, pan-ASEAN sort of regulatory harmonization that is going to allow for companies like DBS to completely seamlessly offer their services. And yet that's going to be critical for Singapore to double down on the ASEAN growth story, not just on what's happening domestically. So could you comment on the regional economic transformation, something that Shailendra has also been very, very bullish on? How are you seeing that regional transformation, and how can we get the regulators to keep pace with the digital changes that you're implementing?
I think it's fair to say that financial services is probably the most protected industry you have, and that's for good reason. Most people want to retain control of the key pillars of their banking sector. Of course, the Australians are now with the Commission revisiting some of these issues. But fundamentally, it is a protected industry. I don't see that changing anytime soon, partly because the consequences of systemic instability we have seen, partly because monetary policy agendas and regimes go through that channel. And frankly, I don't see that changing in a hurry. It's not just in our region, it's even at the global level. Between the Fed and the Europeans, they can't come and see eye to eye on a lot of the issues. So I think that barrier is going to be slow to come off. However, the other elements of trade and capital flows, which I do think you will see a lot more progress with. I think DPM spoke about the National Trade Platform, the trade connectivity we're trying to create across Singapore, Hong Kong to start with, but several countries around the region. It's an archaic process. There are tons of documents, tons of friction. You can eliminate that, and there is a lot more appetite across the region to look for common platforms and sharing to be able to make that work. E-payment regimes. Just yesterday, Prime Minister Modi launched RuPay connectivity with nets. There's another agenda to connect Singapore into Thailand. So I think e-payment regimes which are cross-country, I think there's a lot more appetite to look for solutions around that. At the fringes, market access and capital markets, you will see some of that happen as well. I think at the end of the day, though, if you can create clear efficiencies, blockchain is one, smart contracts and efficiencies which allow people to improve the functioning of the system without necessarily giving up sovereign oversight over the key elements of the industry, that's where you probably see the most progress.
Although with capital markets, it's not just fringe. If you think about the opening of peer-to-peer lending, across the region, that's actually a very large, fast-growing market.
I don't think that will happen very fast, because I think you'll find, as in China, that as soon as you pick up scale beyond a point where the regulator can control it, they will go back and start re-regulating parts of the industry. Because the reality is, when you get China, there are 4,000 peer-to-peer lending companies we got created. And after Izubao and the $9 billion fraud, they went back, regulated, 2,000 of them shut down in 6 months. Right? So I think there is large sources of systemic instability. The regulators go back and rethink. I think we will all be in this test and learn environment. It isn't, in fact, true. We don't know what things are like. You have to experiment and you have to test and learn. But in the test and learn, you will find in some cases that people will start ring fencing. So people speak a lot of things, cryptocurrency. So you can create Bitcoin, you can have universal electronic currency, could create electronic currency around a region, for example. My submission is because monetary policy today is still run through the banking channel, and credit creation still runs through M2 and the fractional reserve process of the banking channel. It's not easy for central sovereign governments to give that up. And as long as you have a nation state and a sovereign government, it'll be very hard to think of a situation where you have a third-party cryptocurrency which handles all of this stuff. So I think it'll take time coming.
although the crypto role in providing some liquidity for entrepreneurs, for startups, is starting to take off with ICOs, but that could potentially be another bubble in some ways, or small sets of bubbles. We're just about out of time, unfortunately, for this panel, and yet it's really been an enormously rich mix of potential, very high potential around where technology can take various industries, but also danger, and Piyush in particular have raised a couple of these macro risks around pooled liquidity risk, for example, and of course data concentration risk that you've all mentioned. So I think that leaves us with a lot to think about around what scenarios we can construct for the future of the region's economies, and let's hope that Singapore navigates both the potential and the danger smartly. So that is it for this second panel. I want to thank our panelists. Brilliant insights, truly, and thank you everyone for being here for these first two sessions. There's a lot more, as you know, coming up for the remainder of the day and the week, and Glenda is going to come and fill us in on all of that. But first, thank you again so much to our panelists. Thank you.
Well, a big thank you to our panelists for that robust exchange. Lots of buzzwords coming out from there. It's amazing. I think one thing that we're going to take away, and I remember very clearly, is data commodity is the new air. Dr. Parag, why don't you just, sum up some of the key, highlights from this current panel discussion?
Well, I'll try to be as buzzword compliant as possible, seeing as the clock ticks down. But I was very heartened by a number of the comments that were made here. The first is the role of the public sector. We wouldn't be here today having this gathering if it weren't for the foresight, if you will, that's provided by the public sector, and the cycles according to which the public sector needs to learn through the feedback loops in the economy and so forth, and the unforeseen consequences of technology deployment. All of that was touched upon, and it all comes back to the public sector being able to absorb those challenges and to respond to them in a proactive way. I was also very pleased with the pan-Asian optimism and the sentiment in both panels. I have very often described Singapore as the capital of Asia, and it's not something that one can say in an official context because it may rub some people the wrong way, but I'm allowed to say it, so I'll say it again. This is the unofficial capital of all of Asia, and that's a very great responsibility in a way to lead the way around regulatory convergence, and in general, with Smart Nation itself being a demonstration project and having an effect on the rest of the region. And then we got into, and I think this is very important, more of a technical conversation. What does a full stack company look like? What does that mean for competition within the economy? How that breaks down the silos between traditional industrial sectors? And everyone needs to pay very, very close attention to that. It's not the kind of thing where, especially in a country that tries to empower citizens towards self-reliance, one has to be smart and educated and use the education that they have, whether they're acquiring it online or through the modified curricula of the formal institutions in the country, to be, I think the term that was used was sort of a digitally resilient, right? And that's something that now applies to all ages, and that really humanizes this question of what Smart Nation needs for all of us. A number of questions that we didn't have time for actually in the Pigeonhole related to employment. And we're fortunate here to be in a nearly full employment situation, but that can change based on some of the disruptions that many of the speakers identified. So I think we had a very realistic set of conversations this morning, which despite the fact that Smart Notion connotes such incredibly positive, almost utopian futures, this was very, very nuts and bolts, and I think that hopefully provided a lot of new information for people to digest, to think about what they're going to do with it. So I'm very, very pleased with how things have gone this morning.
Right,
Thank you.
As well as legacy companies still have a role to play as well. How would you say the two, discussions today, how would you say the two intersect, and how did the two connect?
Well, this is an economy, as with many others in the region, quite frankly. It's quite germane to Asia, as it is in Europe, to have very large legacy companies that have built up over the last decades with state support, with state co-investment, the GLC model, as we have here. And that has significant virtues in terms of the stability it provides. If you really tease apart the financial ecosystem of the technology sector here, of course, there is an important, very strong role, quite frankly, for government resources, financial resources. And the acumen that Temasek, GIC, and others have been building up in the technology sector is actually very, very promising. So that is itself an example of the coexistence. Now, one of the things that no doubt people who are working in that field here will say rightly is that the more we can get the bottom-up innovations that are coming out of the Block 71 and other ecosystems to feed into some of the large legacy companies, the better, right? Invest in the companies that not necessarily disrupt you, but can help you be better at what you're doing. And that is the positive effect we want to have. That might be an area that no country is perfect in because this is just unfolding now, but something that Singapore can really seize upon because we obviously can in a very finite way identify who are the champions that most need to modernize and innovate, who are the companies that we're bringing in or seeding that can help them to reach that next level of digitization. So I'm optimistic about that as well.
Right, and governments have a part to play, and that is creating policies that will help all these businesses as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Parag, for leading these two panel discussions today. Well, we've come to the end of the opening symposium, but before you leave now, do drop by the side of the stage to check out the doodle graphic encapsulating this morning's discussion. The final graphic will be posted on the Smart Nation website and social media pages as well. Now, well, we've come to the end of SNI Week Opening Symposium. There are still lots of activities happening over the next few days. Now, you may wish to check out Innovest Unbound, one of Asia's largest Innovest festivals, and that is at level 5. Now, participants of this morning's symposium, you can register and get your free passes if you go up to a level 5 at the registration booth, and you can use this promo code. It is OS100. So on behalf of the organizers of Smart Nation and Digital Government Group, thank you for attending the opening symposium, and I hope you found the conversations interesting, and please have a good day ahead. Thank you.